Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and I'm happy to announce that we just might have another story for us to cover. We've talked about Dual Terminal, Albaz, and Xyz, and now in the depths of ancient layers full of devious traps and priceless artifacts, a new tale is about to unfold. And we've also got another baddie that's going to get a whole lot of fan art, which I think we can all enjoy. So, walk with me through this world forgotten by time as we catalog these dangers, both the cards and what they're based on, see if we can bring any friends along for the ride, and see if we can find out just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Don't get too excited about rolling the dice, because it's time for Snake Eyes Explained. So what in the world is going on with these cards? Well, normally when a new story is introduced, it takes a while for the archetypes to intermingle, but we're doing that right off the bat with not 2, but 3 new themes. There's Diabellstar, of which we only have the Dark Witch form, though I'm sure we'll be seeing many other versions in the future. There's the Sinful Spoils that she's after, providing a number of very powerful effects, and the creatures that protect her latest find, the Snake Eyes, which currently is the only set of these that have a coherent game plan, that being the usage of several effects that put monsters in the spell and trap zone as continuous spells as a form of pseudo removal, before calling them to your side of the field as allies. Which is actually pretty messed up, because not only is that monster not leaving the field, thus depriving it of any sent to grave triggers, but it even seals up the spell and trap zone, and heaven help you if you're a pendulum pilot. Haven't they suffered enough at the hands of Kashtira? But before we get into those, let's cover our new Bodacious Bounty Hunter, since I'm sure they're going to be very important moving forward. Diabellstar, the Dark Witch, is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, so close to that Dark Magician stat line. You can special summon this card from your hand by sending one other card from your hand or field to the grave, and you can only special summon this monster once per turn this way. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can set a Sinful Spoils spell or trap card directly from your deck, and if this card is sent from the hand or field to the grave during your opponent's turn, you can send a card from your hand or field to the grave, and if you do, special summon this card. These last 2 are both hard once per turns, and they're both very strong. Having an option to revive Diabell, which in turn gets you another Sinful Spoils, is out of this world, and I'm sure a number of decks are foaming at the mouth for a chance to use this card as a way to trigger any grave effects they might have. Not to mention that 7 is becoming a very popular level nowadays, making for great Xyz and Synchro material. And because this doesn't apply any kind of restriction, this can be splashed into almost anything while giving you access to some cool support cards. So keep that in mind for later when we talk about the Sinful Spoils. Or really any archetype that involves this in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the Albaz or Xyz of the lore moving forward, meaning they'll be the diabellstar of the ball. Next up, let's talk about these Snake Eye monsters, the first 3 of which have pretty similar and useful effects. Snake Eye White Birch is a level 1 Fire Pyro monster with 0 attack and 2100 defense, and if you control a fire monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, which you can only do once per turn. During your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can send this card and one other face-up card you control to the grave to special summon a Snake Eye monster from your hand or deck, except a copy of this card. Snake Eye XL has the same type, level, and attribute, has 800 attack and 1000 defense, and if normal or special summoned, you can add a level 1 fire monster from your deck to your hand. It also has the same special summon effect as White Birch, but isn't a quick effect, and can only be done during your turn. The last of this trio is Snake Eye Orc, which also sports the same type, level, and attribute, has 900 attack and 200 defense, and if normal or special summoned, you can target one of your level 1 fire monsters that are either banished or are in the grave and special summon it. And Orc also has the exact same summon effect as Excel. This gives you a pretty nifty line of play where you summon Excel, search White Birch, then special summon it, using Excel's effect to send both to summon Orc, which in turn revives the White Birch, setting up the next monster we're going to talk about after this. But not only does this help out our deck, but Excel gives us options to work with other great cards as well. While the level 1 fire monster pool is very shallow, it's not without its highlights. It can get you any number of Infernobles, Infernoids Pyrmace and Decatron, Jet Synchron, Kurakara Div Incarnate for that new age kaiju power, and to fit with the pyro typing, Volcanic Shell. And because the card you send to grave for the summon effect just has to be face up, once again, you can slot this into a lot of decks without having to worry about stepping on their toes. With my only complaint being that their lack of diverse, unique effects makes them kinda bland. But that's the kind of thing you give up when you aim to be the best around, and I can tell they've got that drive, because they've got that fire in their eyes. Next up is the big payoff for these burning bumblers, Snake Eyes Flamberge Dragon, a level 8 fire dragon monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, once again, so close to Blue Eyes. It can target a monster in any grave or face up on the field and place it face up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell card. And during your opponent's turn, you can target a monster card on the field treated as a continuous spell and special summon it to your field. And if this card is sent from the hand or field to the grave, you can special summon 2 level 1 fire monsters from your grave. Wow, this card is awesome, no two ways about it. We'll have other cards that put monsters in the spell and trap zone, but the fact that Flamberge handles that all on its own is very nice. And because you can do this to both players' graves, you've got a lot to pick from. It's especially good if it has any on-summon effects, because during your opponent's turn, you can spring it on them whenever you want. But keep in mind that these effects don't work on every monster in the spell and trap zone, just ones treated as continuous spells. So while you can potentially snipe Crystal Beasts and Valances in those matchups, you can't grab Plunder Patrols since those are treated as equip cards. The floating effect is also really nice because you can get back White Birch, and because it's a quick effect, you can send the other revived monster to grave to summon another Flamberge Dragon. Heck, you can summon Orc alongside it to revive Excel for a search as well. Also notice that its floating effect works anytime it's sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, meaning that if you put this in your spell and trap zone with another copy of Flamberge, or any other number of effects we'll talk about later, you can trigger this effect by feeding the other effects in your deck that need you to send cards to the grave. This is a really solid boss monster with a super cool effect, and I look forward to using its power to put our opponent on the verge of defeat. That does it for our monsters. Now it's time for the spells and traps. Starting us off, we have a card that actually came out in the set prior to the rest of them because the R&D team is a bunch of cheeky monkeys. Sinful Spoils of Subversion Snake Eye is a normal spell card that targets a face-up monster on the field and places it face-up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. Yup, we've stolen Crystal Beast's thunder, now you can crystallize any monster. Now, obviously, turning your opponent's monsters into a zone lock is pretty nifty for reasons stated previously, but there are a number of other funny applications you can do with this. For instance, this has a lot of potential in Mech Knights. Since you choose the zone the card is placed in, if your opponent has 2 monsters, you can tuck one of them below the other, and now you have a very profitable blue sky column with your opponent unable to play around it. You could also use it in Magical Musket, not only as a spell to activate their effect, but you can put your opponent's monster in the back row for when you make max, giving you another monster you can summon off of that effect if you're not looking to search the Magical Musket spells. You can even use this in Battery Man to effectively remove 2 monsters off the board off of Industrial Strength's effect. You can also use this on your own cards, so there's a chance that Crystal Beast and Valance might use this as a way to complement their own strategy, though I'm not sure how useful it actually is. The decks already have really good engines for accomplishing that mission. This card is kinda bonkers, but in that kind of way where it has very particular, not exceedingly powerful applications. But don't be surprised if this shows up as the surprise tech pick of the format, so make sure you don't lose sight of it. The original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye is a normal spell card that sends one other face-up card you control to the grave to special summon a level 1 fire monster from your hand or deck. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a Snake Eye or diabellstar monster in your grave. You add a level 1 fire monster from your deck to your hand, then place the targeted monster on the bottom of the deck, and you can only use 1 effect per turn and only once per turn. So on initial activation, this is another way to get the Excel line going as long as you have a face-up card you're willing to give up, and while in the grave, it's a searcher that recycles an on-theme card. This is A+ support, no doubt about it, basically doing everything you want an enabler to do. That last Sinful Spoil is cool, but the sequel is never going to be good as the original. The Sinful Spoils Hunter Fiend is a quick play spell card that adds a diabellstar monster from your deck or grave to your hand. And during your main phase, you can banish this card from your grave, then target a Sinful Spoils spell or trap card that is banished or is in your grave, except a copy of this card, to place it on the bottom of your deck, then draw a card. So this gets you more copies of diabellstar, and while we only have 1 at the moment, this is only going to get better as we get more targets. And it also comes with a recycling effect, even getting you back your banished Sinful Spoils, so you can make full use of them before getting them back into rotation. Once again, amazing card, not just for the effect, but also for the visual gag, the poorly drawn wanted poster is easily one of my favorites. Sinful Spoils of Doom, Luciella, is a quick play spell card that targets a level 7 or higher spellcaster monster you control and applies the following effects in sequence. That face-up monster is unaffected by other monsters' effects this turn, but send it to the grave during the standby phase of the next turn, and all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls lose attack equal to that monster's attack. Then, if any of those monsters' attack has been reduced to 0 as a result, destroy it. Wow, this card is bonkers, I love it! Use Luciella on your own turn, and not only do you have a monster that's not going to get touched by most pieces of interaction, it's also a board wipe, clearing anything with 2500 or less attack, and making anything bigger than that extremely vulnerable to battle. Now, losing diabellstar might seem like a bug, but it's actually a feature. Make sure you use it on your own turn, and when it's sent to the grave during the next standby phase, it'll do so during your opponent's turn, enabling the revival effect of our hunter, which in turn gets us another search. But because the requirement is just level 7 or higher spellcasters, you could tech this into a number of other decks, if you find you need the raw removal. Heck, I'm sure Dark Magician will love the opportunity to get Tall, Dark, and Handsome into the grave so Eternal Soul can revive it again for that Dark Magic Circle removal. It'll really make their doomsday. The Shrine of Serpentine Sight Snake Eye is a field spell card that, when activated, places a Snake Eye monster from your hand, deck, or grave face up in its owner spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. Level 1 fire monsters you control gain 1100 attack, very cute, and once per turn if your opponent normal or special summons any number of monsters except during the damage step, you can target a monster on the field treated as a continuous spell and special summon it to your field. So hey, now you have another instance of Flamberge's effects. That's pretty cool. And setting up your back row with the Snake Eye is actually really good because now that's a free card you can send to the grave with almost any of our effects for free. Not to mention that it helps Orc get through your combos if you don't have anything else to work with. Speaking of those though, the 1100 point boost is outrageous, turning Excel into a 1900 point level 1 and Orc into a 2000. And here I thought they were just going to be dungeon fodder. Guess things get a bit more serious when in the raid boss's domain. The Glaring Ruler Snake Eyes is a normal trap card that you can activate if the total levels of all Snake Eye monsters you control equal 2 or more, and you get to pick one of 2 effects. Either target a monster in your opponent's grave or face up field and place it in its owner's spell and trap zone face up as a continuous spell, or target a monster card on the field treated as a continuous spell and special summon it to your field. So it's just more of Flamberge's effect. You know, I'm gonna be honest, I was kind of hoping some of these would be a bit more interesting. I mean, the activation condition is kind of funny, asking you to have either the big boss itself or 2 of the smaller ones, you know, because they have 2 eyes, but it's just more of the same. It adds consistency and redundancy, sure, but it also means these aren't covering any weaknesses the deck might have, which I feel is a glaring oversight. Sinful Spoils of Betrayal Sylvia is a normal trap card that sends a diabellstar monster from your hand or face-up field to the grave, then targets a face-up card on the field and negates its effects. And when your opponent activates a card or effect in response to the activation of your diabellstar monster's effect or Sinful Spoil spell and trap card or effect, you can banish this card from your grave to negate the opponent's effect, but you can only use 1 effect per turn, and only once per turn. So now you get a little bit of negation thrown in there, and is another outlet for summoning diabellstar if you use this on your opponent's turn. And because this can target any face-up card on the field, you can even negate normal spells and traps if you chain to them, which is super awesome, letting you hit cards that you otherwise wouldn't be able to respond to, like Dark Ruler No More, and the occasional Forbidden Droplets if they didn't pitch a trap card for it. And remember, diabellstar is supremely splashable, so it might be worth it to run it in your deck just to access this card to combat those kinds of threats. All in all, this is a fantastic card, and it even has that hint of whimsy that we've seen from previous cards. Yeah, Sylvia looks like a huge Bloodborne boss chomping away, and Diabell is channeling that sweet, sweet Ecto Cooler, but Flamberge looks like it's doing the anime Pain Howl, which is very delightful. Alright, so that's all the cards we have so far, but before we get into the tech picks, what in the world is going on here? If this is the new lore archetype, what's the story? Well, like most of these stories when things start up, details are very sparse. We're gonna need future sets to flesh out the setting, but here are a few things of note now that I've had some time to stew on them, on top of now having access to the recently released reference arts. On top of Snake Eye, Luciella and Sylvia are also Sinful Spoils, but they aren't just magical artifacts. They are living, breathing creatures. Notice that green furry claw draped over diabellstar's shoulder and the little bat hand over her right hip? Well, those are Luciella and Sylvia in their low-powered state, acting as companions during day-to-day life before becoming powerful weapons in combat. And we know this because of that reference art I talked about earlier, showing Sylvia painting her nails, Luciella putting a blanket on diabellstar. They're all just kind of a little family, it's very cute. But that begs the question, how did she come into the possession of these sinful spoils? The parasitic dynamic means she probably wasn't born with it, especially since other sinful spoils exist outside of these two, as evidenced by the existence of a snake eye, so I think it's safe to say that Diabell is out on a mission to hunt down all the sinful spoils. For what reason? I can't say, but it's probably a pretty darn good one, since she doesn't seem to be afraid of running afoul of the authorities to do so. Because I don't think a random treasure hunter would get a wanted poster made of them, no matter how shoddy it might be, which implies that not all the sinful spoils are in secluded ruins. Either Luciella, Sylvia, or both were owned by someone or something, diabellstar took the liberty of borrowing them, and now the authorities are after them. But since the two new friends seem amicable enough, the spoils might actually be happy to have been taken. There's also the possibility that our protagonist has more spoils that they've yet to show. The reference art says that the color green is meant to show the parts influenced by these sinful spoils, and another part of her that has that color are the tips of her hair, as well as her right eye, though only when she's wearing the Omen half mask. However, what she has in store for Snake Eye now that it's been captured, or what else she has plans to do, is currently a bit of a mystery. However, we do have a bit of info in regards to the Snake Eyes. See, their names are derived from an old Lithuanian folktale, Egil, the Queen of Grass Snakes. There's a number of tellings, but one recurring aspect is that Egil has 4 children. 3 of them are sons named after trees, oak, ash, and birch, which line up with our level 1s, Orc, Excel, and White Birch. The Excel one seems a little strange, but it's named after a kind of ash tree called Fraxinus excelsior. The 4th child is a daughter named for the aspen tree, so expect a 4th member of the team in a future set. Another interesting tidbit I picked up is that Egil goes home to visit her family, who were upset because her husband, Zylvinus, the grass snake prince, essentially tricked her into marrying him and took her away from them. So they trick Zylvinus into leaving his palace, at which point the family ambushes the prince and kills him with scythes, which appear to be what Luciella's art is referencing. That's pretty cool, and does imply that Flamberge is Zylvinus, which means we still don't know where the queen is, unless there's some piece of information that I haven't picked up on. Oh, and while it may seem strange to the Pokemon-attuned members of my audience for the big fire dragon to be associated with grass snakes, there are sacred animals of Saul, a sun goddess, so there's that. At this point, I predict we'll be seeing more of Diabellstar's escapades, gaining more sinful spoils based on other mythologies, and eventually we'll get a rival faction dead set on hunting down the hunter. But we'll see if this has the same kind of appeal as other lore archetypes. But as for me, I'm excited. I'm also very sad we have to wait 3 whole months for the next set. I want spoilers now! Seriously, Konami, please let me do previews for your sets. Please let me talk about the lore archetypes. I have a desperate need for it. I need it. Okay, so that's all I have to say about these cards, mechanically and through lore, but what do we actually do with them? Well, with the kinds of things you can do with Diabellstar, I don't think a full-on deck is in the cards right now, but could make its way into a variety of other themes. As for Snake Eyes, it also feels like it's better as an extra little tool that decks can make use of as opposed to making it its own deck, since its whole identity right now seems to just be make big dragon and steal stuff. So we'll be on the lookout for cards that give this deck a bit more of a solid game plan, or discovering what decks could use a little aggro power. So what can we play to help them out? Well, I think the biggest piece of support to keep in mind right now is Bonfire. This recently released Rhoda for Pyro monsters gets us all of our level 1 Snake Eyes, meaning we have yet another way to get Excel combos going. 1-for-1 is also a way to supplement the original Snake Eyes spell, but can only send monsters as its cost, so it can be a bit bricky in certain hands. If we use Bonfire, it's probably best to make sure we include some other targets. Like we mentioned previously, decks that run level 1 Pyro monsters on its own are best, and that's where Volcanic Shell comes in. It makes the perfect card to send to grave for your effect since it gets you a replacement for a small chunk of change, but you can also use Bonfire to get Volcanic Rimfire, which can enable more Volcanic and Blaze Accelerator plays, though you could also search Volcanic Rocket instead if you need a Blaze Accelerator card that bad. And let's not forget that it also grabs Barrier Statue of the Inferno if you want a little floodgate action. Flamberge can put your own monsters in the spell and trap zone on their way to being revived, but that leaves them vulnerable to back row removal. However, you won't have to worry about that once we get our hands on the Link 2 Flame Tongue the Blazing Magical Blade. Not only does it require 2 fire monsters as material, lining up perfectly with our deck, it keeps our face-up spells and traps from being destroyed by our opponent's card effects. And if any of your fire monsters get banished, this can grab them right back. Not bad for a Gallantmon lookalike. As for a silly tech pick, Artifacts. Now, they only special summon themselves when destroyed while set during your opponent's turn, but that's totally fine. While Scythe may be banned, thank goodness, we can still put Moral Talk in the back row and summon it during our opponent's turn to pop a card. Alternatively, we can get Lancey into rotation, using it turn after turn to keep our opponent from banishing cards. And having the ability to shut off an entire mechanic like that, in my opinion, is pretty ridiculous. And I'm saying that as a branded player. Can Labyrinth please stop cycling Dimension Barrier? I'm so upset! And that's the deal with Goblin Riders. Well, they're a series of level 3 monsters of various types and attributes who all ride giant tamed animals into battle, and come with a big focus on Xyz summoning. Many of their effects help you swarm the field, and each main deck monster has some variant of an effect that can special summon them, provided you detach a material from any Xyz monster on the board. So they work pretty well with your game plan, and have great game against opposing Xyz strategies. Oh hey Pearly, didn't see you there. And if you thought we were just going to be breaking out the old rank 3 staples, then think again, because the theme also comes with a variety of ways to modulate levels, meaning we have a huge roster to choose from, giving us all the tools we need to run over the competition. Let's get started with those main deck monsters. Goblin Rider Boon, the Mach Speed, is a Wind Warrior monster with 1300 attack and 0 defense, and during the main phase, if this card is in your hand or grave as a quick effect, you can detach a material from a monster on the field, and if you do, special summon this card. And until the end of the next turn after this effect resolves, you can't special summon copies of this card. This means you'll have to be careful about when you deploy this, but that's the price Boon pays for being probably the best out of the squad when it comes to their revival effect. It doesn't auto-banish itself, so you aren't punished if you don't Xyz summon with it soon enough, and at quick speed, it can sneak in to do some extra damage, or give you a surprise blocker. It's also interesting to see what I think is the game's first instance of a hard once per every other turn restriction, which is of course distinct from Mirror Jade's soft once per every other turn restriction. Please keep up. Goblin Rider Clutter the Noisy is a Fire Beast Warrior monster with 1500 attack and 0 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a goblin monster in your grave, accept a copy of this card, and special summon it. During your opponent's main phase, if this card is in your grave as a quick effect, you can detach a material from a monster on the field, and if you do, special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. Nice to see we have a 1-card Xyz summon, and even better that it works on special summon as well. That way we can send out Clutter and a friend during our opponent's turn. But that's where things get a little tricky. Since the Noisy we summon will banish itself when it leaves the field, and since you can't Xyz on your opponent's turn, at least not without some help, it is pretty risky. That being said, it could still be worth it against the right matchup, because while you can't Xyz summon on your opponent's main phase, they certainly can, and snatching away some material from their precious monsters can be a huge game changer. Clutter is getting into other players' businesses so much they should change their title to Clutter the Nosy. Goblin Rider Doug the Assaulter is an Earth Warrior monster with 1600 attack and 0 defense, and if this card is in your hand, you can detach a material from a monster on the field, and if you do, special summon this card. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a Goblin Rider spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. Being a Stratos for the theme spell and trap cards is a huge help because all of our on-theme options are ridiculously powerful, and even makes for the best summon target off of Clutter, since Doug isn't able to revive itself from grave. This means you're getting value on both yours and your opponent's turn, which may seem a little greedy, but don't worry, I'm giving you full permission to pig out. Goblin Rider Mionda the Cold-Blooded is a Water Fiend monster with 1300 attack and 0 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon a goblin monster from your hand, except a copy of this card. If this card is in your grave, you can detach a material from a monster on the field to special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. So one of the big weaknesses the deck has is in the early game where there won't be any Xyz monsters to pull material from. So having a monster that turbos out a pair to help make our first one is going to be invaluable, and still has uses as the game goes on, because it's a repeatable monster that we can get from our grave that effectively gets monsters in our hand onto the field without committing to our normal summon. And as long as we tuck this under an Xyz monster as soon as it hits the field, we'll have access to it over and over again, so you won't have to worry about running out of plays when this mouse is in the house. Alright, that covers the main crew, but what about those exciting Xyz monsters? Goblin Rider Big Head Gabonga is a rank 3 light beast warrior monster with 2100 attack and 0 defense, requiring any 2 level 3 monsters as material. If this card is Xyz summoned, you can add a goblin monster from your deck to your hand, and if any number of material are detached from a monster on the field, you can target one other face-up monster on the field and attach it to this card as material. And during the end phase, you can attach a goblin monster from your deck to this card as material. This is fantastic. While it doesn't have its own effect that detaches material, that's just fine, because we want to save that for our riders to use as fuel. It even keeps the tank full by stealing another monster on the field, which can include your opponents. And with our ability to summon Goblin Riders on basically every turn, your opponent's gonna have to keep an eye out. And even if it runs out of material, this mandrill is fuel efficient, attaching a goblin monster from your deck during the end phase. But this is where things get a little funky. See, Emony has informed me that the way Goblin is worded in the original Japanese for these cards doesn't entirely line up with the broader usage of it across the more general Goblin card pool. Think your Goblin attack forces and Goblin zombies. But then that begs the question why it works with Goblins and not Goblin Riders specifically. More information is likely to come out in the following weeks, but for now, I'm pinning my hopes on Gabonga being a bridge that connects all of Goblin kind into one glorious Goblin community, where the spoils of tinkering and junk scrounging can be had by all. A big-brained move for an appropriately big-headed Goblin.
Hi there, Emony here. So I was wrong about this. I thought that because Goblin Biker is spelt using kanji, and goblins have historically been spelled using katakana, they might not be compatible. However, Konami decided that the furigana of Goblin in Goblin Biker was going to inform how the archetype worked, so it is indeed compatible with all other goblins. Yay! And I will take the L on this one.
Goblin's Crazy Beast is a rank 6 Dark Fiend monster with 2700 attack and 0 defense, requiring 2 or more level 6 monsters as material. I know that seems impossible to pull off right now, but just go with it, it's actually pretty easy to summon. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can target a spell or trap card on the field. Detach 2 material from any amount of monsters on the field, and if you do, attach that spell or trap card to this card as material. If any number of monsters you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can detach a material from this card instead. And if this card is in your grave, you can special summon this card, then attach a goblin monster from your grave to it as material. But you can only use that last effect once per duel. That's right, the deck made to fight against Pearly now has a monster with a noir-style effect. Thankfully, it only hits spells and traps, so it's not too out of hand, but it also lacks a once per turn restriction, so you can expect to get a lot of mileage out of this monster. Not to mention, it comes with a kind of Dingirsu style effect that keeps your monsters safe from any kind of effect destruction. You'll love to see it. And to top it all off, while it's not repeatable, having that once per duel revival effect means it can not only come back from a massive beating, you can use it as link material for something like SP Little Knight with impunity, getting Beast right back into the fray. It's a spectacular boss monster to help anchor your board against a number of threats, and even gives you a member of another archetype while they're at it. Come to think of it, that monster has a goblin on it too. Alright, that's all our monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps. Grand Arrival of the Goblin Riders is a normal spell card that adds a goblin monster from your deck to your hand. Then you can detach a material from a monster on the field, and if you do, special summon a level 4 or lower goblin monster from your hand. You can also banish this card from your grave to detach a material from a monster on the field, then you can add a goblin from your grave to your hand. This is about as solid of a starter as you can get. It fetches you any goblin, no questions asked, and if there are any spare Xyz material lying around, it turns it into a special summon. And it gets you back a goblin from your grave if there are even more material to snack on. You can even do this all in the same turn, so no need to wait an arbitrary period of time, you can get your value right now. Talk about making an entrance. This is an arrival that would make even diabellstar halt. No, and they're still going. Oh well, nice try. Pack it up, folks. We'll give it another try next time. Grand Meeting of the Goblin Riders is a continuous spell card that gives all goblin monsters you control a 300 attack boost for each goblin monster you control. During your main phase, you can normal summon a goblin monster in addition to your normal summoner set, and you can also target 2 goblin monsters you control that have a level, then activate one of these effects. Either have the level of one of those monsters become the level of the other, or the level of both monsters become their combined original level. And this is how you get into our rank 6. Target 2 level 3 goblins, choose the mode that gives them each their combined level, and voila! But because they're all level 3, why do we also have the level matching effect? Well, that's another point towards this working with all goblins, because a vast majority of those monsters are level 4. We can even search level 4 and unders with Grand Arrival. So if it holds true, we not only have access to rank 3s and 6s, but potentially 4s, 7s, and 8s. And all this level fixing is on top of an extra normal summon, crucial for deploying our monsters early, and comes with a ridiculous attack buff. If it only gave each goblin 300 attack, then that would be a respectable boost. But 300 for each goblin per goblin? And you could potentially have multiple of this card on the board? That's not just goblin squared, that's goblin cubed. And as we all know, goblin times goblin times goblin is infinite goblins. And you can trust me on that one, because that's goblin math. Goblin Rider Stampede is a continuous trap card, and during the main phase, you can, immediately after this effect resolves, Xyz summon using only goblin monsters you control as material. And if you control a Goblin Xyz monster, you can target an effect monster on the field. Detach a material from a monster on the field, and if you do, negate the targeted monster's effects until the end of this turn. And you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. So thankfully, for the sake of balance at least, you can't just make a Goblin Xyz, then immediately negate a monster. But that doesn't take away from how powerful this card is, not one bit. Using Clutter's effect on your opponent's turn is now a much safer prospect, because now you can Xyz summon during their turn, and having a negate on hand is super useful on turns you don't need that effect. Heck, you could even do that on your own turn in case one of your goblins is about to get hit by some targeted interaction or negation. You can just scoop them under an Xyz monster, and now you no longer have to worry. Also, I love that you can actually make any Xyz monster with this, it's just that the material needs to be goblin monsters, meaning any off-theme option is open to you as long as you have the right levels. It certainly got my seal of approval. Or should I say my stampede of approval. Okay, goblin nonsense is done, but now we've got to cover the new diabellstar story cards. Though in this case it's more like new Snake Eye cards. Snake Eye Populace is a level 1 fire pyro monster with 700 attack and 200 defense, and if this card is added to your hand except by drawing it, you can special summon it. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a Snake Eye spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a fire monster in your grave and place it face up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell card. Ooh, this card's a doozy. Not only can Snake Eye Ash add this from your deck to your hand to get the effect started, you can also run the new Pyro Search spell, Bonfire, in a few months in the TCG. That way, you can do it without even committing to a summon, all while getting you a free Snake Eye spell or trap card. And if recent tournament trends are any indication, one card in particular, original Sinful Spoil Snake Eye, is gonna be a great target. And if you're playing the theme pure, getting another way to put your monsters into the back row is... well, we already have 100 ways to do that, so what's one more? I think it's a given at this point that once it comes out, Populace is gonna be pretty popular. Snake Eye Dramatic Chase is a quick play spell card that places a diabellstar monster from your hand, deck, or grave face up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell card. And during the end phase, you can banish this card from your grave, then target a monster card treated as a continuous spell you control and special summon it. This reads kind of like an alternate version of Wanted, Hunter of Sinful Spoils. That card adds Diabellstar to the hand, but you still have to pay for their cost of summoning. Dramatic Chase will handle that all on its own, just at a bit of a delay. This works pretty well for decks that don't have the fodder on hand to pay for the summon, but still want to have a card like Silvera to interact with the opponent. But at that point, why bother? Most decks that use Diabellstar find a way to use that cost to their advantage, so if you don't need that, I'm sure you have better options. It's not so bad for a more pure Snake Eye deck because they can get the Diabellstar on field a lot quicker while still having the raw material to feed the spellcaster's effects, but for everyone else, well, you won't have to worry about going after this chase rare. Alright, that's all the Goblin Rider cards. Now it's time for a little combo you may want to know when playing the deck, and all it takes is a single card. Tour Guide of the Underworld, because we just so happen to have a level 3 Fiend in the roster. So this not only makes a rank 3, but even sets up our engine. Normal summon the guide, and use their effect to summon Meonda from deck. Overlay them for Big Head Gavanga, using its effect to search your Doug the Assaulter. Use Doug's in-hand effect to special summon itself, detaching that Meonda. And now you get a Goblin Rider spell or trap card off of its summon effect. Grand Arrival is the perfect pick here, because with one more material left, you can use it to search Clutter the Noisy, then special summon it by detaching the tour guide from under Gabonga. Use its effect to summon out the Meonda and Grave, and now you have 3 level 3 monsters to work with. If your opponent has an empty board and you can attack, making a Shuriken out of those 3 presents lethal damage, but if you're going first, consider using 2 of them, preferably Clutter and Meonda, to make a Xyz Armor Torpedo. This gets you a draw right off the bat to help you dig for extension or interruption, then you can rank it up immediately into a Xyz Armor Fortress, using its effect to search out full armored Xyz. Set that trap card, then make full armor Dark Knight Lancer on top of Fortress, because now it no longer has material. Move to the end phase, attach a goblin from your deck to Gabonga as material, then pass the turn over to your opponent. Then, during your opponent's turn, you can revive your goblins using their effect, at which point you can quick Xyz summon by using that full armored Xyz, making whatever rank 3 you want. Heck, if you ended up summoning 2 goblins by way of Clutter, you could use the Dug that you still have on board to make that a Shuriken to give you a monster negate. From there, at any point, you can banish the full armored Xyz from Grave to attach that Xyz Armor Torpedo to Lancer, which not only applies its effect to keep Lancer from being destroyed by card effects, but also triggers Lancer's effect to attach one of your opponent's monsters to it as material. Not to mention that Lancer's stats by this point are going to be gigantic! So, off a single card, you've got Gabonga with its Quick Absorb online, a full armored Lancer ready to tear into your opponent with its own Absorb effect, another Xyz of your choice, and you still have a full grip of cards left for extension and protection. So, with that little tidbit out of the way, what do we do with Goblin Riders? Well, if you're familiar with other 3-axis strategies, the idea shouldn't be too far off. We're a monster combo deck looking to leverage the extra deck for powerful extenders, enablers, and game enders. Our deck is in a pretty good place when it comes to facilitating all this. Now we just need some non-engine that helps to insulate us while we do what we do best. Go full Goblin mode! So what can we play to help them out? Well, since we are a level 3 centric deck, I wouldn't be doing my job very well if I didn't bring up Ken the Warrior Dragon and Gen the Diamond Tiger. These newly released TCG exclusives are causing quite the stir, and for good reason. Because you can get an extra normal summon from Meeting, they're pretty easy to slot into your usual lines of play. And we can search them with Rhoda, which we were probably already playing to search out Dug or Boone. We'll want to get Gen so we can give our opponent Ken, this way we can dig deeper into our deck for our power cards. And the bonus is, since our opponent will have a monster, Gabonga's effect to scoop up a monster will be live, even on turn 1. Oh, and again, they are level 3, so we can use them for our usual game plan. It's pretty great. What about those Goblin synergies? Scrap Goblin is a searchable tuner, and with access to our level modulation, can make us a lot of slick synchro monsters, though far too numerous to count here. Goblin Zombie is a problem just waiting to happen, what with its non-once per turn searching that pairs very well with the Link summoning mechanic, something we can also make good use of thanks to all this material we're generating. There are a number of Goblin Attack Force retrains, but none really have the utility I'd like to see outside of the new Goblin Paratrooper Squad, giving us a way to negate our opponent's monster effects. We can summon it out of the hand with Meonda or Grand Arrival, but we can also summon it with another goblin that's much more thematic, Goblinberg. This also really helps us turbo out monsters and, in a pinch, can summon the paratroopers to keep a monster locked down. Then, once that opponent's monster is dealt with, we can just use it as material. Since we are so prolific in our rank 3 capabilities, what are some other Xyz monsters we can make good use of? Well, if any of our little Goblinos fall head over heels into the banished zone, Levier is there to get them right back. Ghost Trick Alucard can help us deal with set cards, and can even lead us into the Ghost Trick package that lands us a Utopic Draco Future, which is another stellar Xyz monster we can make use of. Next are the rank 6s. Beatrice has always been a fantastic option for setting up your grave, and right behind it is Constellar Ptolemy M7 for removal or recovery. Though if it's removal you want, Dampier Vampire Sheridan is where it's at. Dragonlark Peyrin is great for revival, and Evolzar Lars gives you some handy negation. Transcendosaurus Drillignathus is a funny inclusion, as we can strip it of material fairly easily to get that double damage going. Wolo is another form of quick graveyard hate, and Virtual World Phoenix Fonfon can do that and hit a card on board at the same time, though a bit slower. As for rank 7s, the pool is pretty shallow. We have the old standbys of Big Eye to steal a monster, and Dracosac to make us free material for summons. And to be fair, both actually help us make Little Knight. We just link whatever we stole with Big Eye to make it, and the 2 tokens off of Dracosac can make IP Masquerena, which is a quick Little Knight. How about some other themes we can splash in? Currently, 2 come to mind, and you can even play both of them if you're feeling daring enough. First is Punk. It has a variety of level 3 monsters we can easily grab with emergency teleport. They get us value, and also open up the Synchro pool. Hard to say no to powerful game enders like Amazing Dragon and Psychic and Punisher. Our other option is Gold Pride, allowing us to fold any 2 level 3s into Chariot Carry, which gives us better luck next time, which then opens up the entire theme. Captain Carry and Leon are also both level 3s, so they can also help enable our strategy. Just be careful with Leon's effect, as it does lock your extra deck when used. Personally, I look forward to playing a Gold Pride Punk Goblin Rider deck sometime in the near future. That's exactly the kind of energy I want to bring to the dueling table. As for a silly tech pick, hit your opponent with that number 30 Acid Golem of Destruction lock. Play Creature Swap to get it onto your opponent's field, then rob it of all its material with your goblins. Now, your opponent can't special summon and will slowly melt away as Golem eats away at their life points. Okay, alright, enough of that namby-pamby game stuff. What about the lore? I regret to inform you that there is not a lot of lore here. Populus is the 4th member of the Snake Eye siblings I spoke about in that video's lore section, who was turned into a Quaking Aspen, or as it's known by its scientific name, Populus Tremula. As for its origins, we did see diabellstar ripping open the main eye of Flamberge's dragon, so if that monster represents Sylvanus, the Grass Snake King, Populus might have been trapped inside, who now travels with diabellstar. Once she gets back to town after her escapades, the Goblin Riders spot diabellstar, recognizing that sour face from the wanted posters, and launch their attack. At some point, one of them manages to steal away Populus, sending diabellstar into a murderous rampage trying to get their new pet back. Populus might also have been used to power up Gabonga potentially. Look at the flames coming out of the rider's head. Either they've got Populus, a different Snake Eye gem, or potentially another Sinful Spoil that diabellstar will be able to add to their collection. I tried to do some investigating to see if the Goblin Riders were based on any kind of myth or legend, something I posited would be the case since the first adversary was based on the Grass Snake legend, but we haven't gotten many leads here. It just seems like they wanted to put in a bunch of goblins, and I mean, more power to them, but I miss the Albaz lore. Though, I will say, this isn't entirely a wash. Between 2 sets and some very informative concept art, we've gotten some strong characterization not just for diabellstar, but the world they live in. It's a setting where industrial cityscapes are within travel distance of ancient haunted ruins. There's some kind of central authority here doling out bounties on people searching for ancient artifacts, and roving gangs of opportunists looking to cash in on said bounty. It may not be the epic lore with all kinds of references and story threads that I prefer, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't already charmed.
Beware the woods that bend and twist, for they hide roots in roiling mist. Jagged branches beckon fools with tempting fruitful crimson jewels. Apples wrapped in snow-cursed gold, yearning for your soul to hold. With eyes within and eyes abound, your movements watched, your path turned round. Before you see where your feet lead, you shall fall prey to fiendish deed. While mentors act as students' shield, it is their fate that is now sealed. Fang of wolf and wing of bat, the curse is set, and that is that. From this day forth the star shall toil, seeking out the sinful spoil. But with another she is entwined, the keeper follows close behind. Beware the woods that lead through hell, lest ye cross paths with Diabell.
That's right, it's time for another lore update! Last we left our Seeker of the Sinful Spoils, she was fighting off the Goblin Bikers, who sought to capture little ol' Poplar. And then we, skipped a set, because there really wasn't much to talk about. But then, Infinite Forbidden came out, and now we have a lot more to chew on. So first, we're going to cover the Diabell, Goblin Rider, and Sinful Spoil cards that we passed on last time, followed by an overview of the new White Woods archetype that makes up diabellstar's past. Then, we'll explore what all of that means in terms of our story. First up, we get to cover diabellstar's rival, Diabell's
the original Sin Keeper, a level 7 light illusion monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. And if a Sinful Spoils card is in either player's graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only special summon diabells once per turn this way. While face up on the field, your opponent must set spell and trap cards before they activate them, and if a spell or trap card becomes set on the field while this card is in the monster zone, except during the damage step, you can target a card you control and a card your opponent controls and to destroy him. Ah, what a perfect counter to diabellstar's signature effect. She sets a card on summon, and the Sin Keeper blows it away. It's also what makes Diabell's Floodgate style effect that potent. You always get a chance to blast an opponent's card, and that's not all the things it interacts with. Not only does it just hard counter pendulums, it also shuts off the utility of cards like Infinite Impermanence and Evenly Matched. And being a free summon in Sinful Spoil decks is just icing on the cake. Even the name is appropriate because it has committed the ultimate sin, being an illusion monster that can destroy monsters in battle. For shame. Snake Eye Diabellstar is a level 8 fire spellcaster monster with 2800 attack and 2600 defense, and when an attack is declared involving this card and an opponent's monster, you can place this card from the field and that opponent's monster face up in their owner's spell and trap zones as continuous spells. While this card is a continuous spell, you can target a fire monster in your grave, except a copy of this card, to place it face up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell, and if you do, special summon this card. So if this fights anything it can't deal with, it just Crystal Beasts both of the involved monsters, and then it can hop back out by putting one of your fire monsters from your graveyard into your back row. It's a pretty snazzy monster to bully your opponent with, and having another target for Seeker is pretty chill. Honestly, if I thought feeding my pets would result in just a big power boost, I think I would have done a better job taking care of my Tamagotchis. Okay, now it's time to check in with our Goblin Bikers, starting with Troika Gruyere, a rank 3 light warrior Xyz monster with 1700 attack and 0 defense, requiring 2 or more level 3 monsters as material. While 3 or more Xyz material are attached to monsters on the entire field, Goblin monsters you control can attack directly. Once per turn, if any number of monsters are normal or special summoned while this card is in the monster zone, except during the damage step, you can target one of those monsters and attach a material from a monster on either field, and if you do, change that targeted monster's battle position. And once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can detach a material from a monster on either field, and if you do, negate that attack. Troika is great because it gives us a win condition, letting all of our goblins attack directly so you get all that sweet damage in, while giving you ways to stop your opponent from retaliating against you. The battle position change will more likely than not be used to turn monsters from attack to defense, and the negate attack, well, negates attacks. The only issue with this is that it keeps spending material, and you need to have 3 or more to get that direct attack. Thankfully, it's 3 material across all monsters on the board, so if you can get another Xyz monster, they can help you shoulder the burden. It's a really slow and steady situation, right up until you hit the turbo. Trust me, this turtle can move. You think a monster with 0 defense is going to be weighed down by a shell? Heck, it's probably just made out of paper mache. Goblin Biker Grand Pile Up is a normal trap card that targets an Xyz monster you control and special summons a Goblin Xyz monster from your extra deck by using that target as material, and if you do, attach this card to it as material. This is counted as a legit Xyz summon and does transfer the materials to the summoned monster. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a Goblin Xyz monster you control and a card in either grave, and attach the targeted card from the grave to that monster as material. So this lets you make whatever Xyz monster you want, though generally it's going to be a rank 3 considering that's what our monster lineup is. Then we can turn any of them into a Goblin Xyz at any point. The best target being Goblin's Crazy Beast, since you otherwise have to jump through a few hoops to make that happen. And the Xyz material attaching effect is also pretty huge, as it kind of works as a way to attack the opponent's grave since it grabs a card from either grave at quick speed. But I don't think too many people are going to be rooting for the mascot turned Crazy Beast after causing a giant pileup like this. People are trying to get home from their commute, for crying out loud. This will make the Goblin Bikers look like common delinquents in comparison. Next, let's cover our Sinful Spoils.
Sinful Spoils Struggle is a quick play spell card that targets any number of cards on the field and destroys them, the maximum number of targets on each side of the field being the number of that player's Sinful Spoil cards that are either banished or is in their grave. And if the set card is destroyed or banished by an opponent's activated effect, you can shuffle up to 2 cards from the field into the deck. I'm not really sure what the applications of this card is. We don't really have a theme that cares about its own cards being destroyed, at least in terms of the Sinful Spoils lineup, and we can only destroy our opponent's monsters if they're running any Sinful Spoils, which we can't really count on. Even with the diabellstar package being shoved into almost everything nowadays, it's just not feasible. It is cool to see that Poplar has a bottomless appetite that can only be sated by feasting on giant beasts. But unless the format gets really centralized or we get that theme that likes to destroy its own cards, it's gonna be a struggle fitting this into any lists. Whispers of Sinful Spoils is a quick play spell card that targets an illusion or spellcaster monster you control to return that face-up monster to the hand or extra deck, then special summon an illusion or spellcaster monster from your grave or banishment. And if this card is sent to the grave to activate a monster effect, you can set it. This is skipping ahead a bit to what was released in our latest core set, but we are talking about Sinful Spoils here, so just keep some of this design in mind for later because we will be seeing it again. It's a pretty snazzy card to pay the cost for diabellstar with, because then it'll reset, and Diabell is a spellcaster, so you can flip the Whispers on the following turn to put that back into your hand to summon a spellcaster or illusion from your grave or banishment. Then you can use her effect again later because she's now in your hand. Even grabbing this with diabellstar is pretty cool too, in kind of the same way that original Sinful Spoils is for any deck with a level 1 fire monster, though the quick play status of this spell does make it slower than it just being a normal spell like original Sinful Spoil. However, any spellcaster or illusion deck now has a reliable revival effect to get their best monsters back into rotation. A bit ominous that all of the branches in the White Woods are now not white, but I'm sure everything will be just fine. Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morion is a normal trap card that targets a face-up special summoned monster on the field and changes it to face-down defense position. And if you control a level 5 or higher illusion monster while this card is in your grave, you can set this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. Hey, a searchable Book of Moon, that seems pretty clean. It doesn't work on normal summons, sadly, but since a majority of good monsters will be special summoned, it's not much of an issue, links notwithstanding. And if you're on the Diabell's package, or any other big illusion cores like the Chimeras, you get to use this again later. Now, because it's not super clear from the art, I do want to point out that, despite the apple being very prominent in this shot, Morion is actually the feather sleeve of Diabell's coat, as shown in the Diabell's concept art, acting much like Diabellstar's Sinful Spoil companions, though Morion doesn't have the same kind of sentience that the others do. Kinda wish they'd used the card named after it to show off that Sinful Spoil in a bit more depths, but I guess the designers were asleep at the wheel for this one. Sinful Spoil Subdual is a normal trap card that takes a level 5 or higher illusion monster from your deck and either adds it to your hand or special summons it. But if you special summon the monster with this effect, you can't activate its effect during the main phase of this turn. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a face-down card you control and return it to the hand, then you can set a spell or trap card from your hand. You can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. Now, this is much more specific for illusions, which for now is only Diabell's within our story, but does currently have a wide variety of targets, including Nightmare Apprentice, which itself is pretty easy to summon from the hand, allowing you to maintain its effect, which will in turn search you another illusion monster. It's also important to note that if you do special summon the monster, it just can't activate its effects, but the continuous ones will still apply. So Diabell's will still force the opponent to set their back row before activating them, and our orthodox illusions will still apply their monsters can't be destroyed by battle effects. Heck, you can even activate any effects that work outside the main phase, because that's the only time where they're restricted from activation. So if you want to summon Golgoyle the Steel Seismic Smasher for a big body and a free summon, just feel free. Because of this, I expect Diabellstar is going to see play in a number of illusion decks moving forward, especially with Whispers acting as a good secondary target. But I don't even think it needed the extra help, but women stepping on things is already a recipe for success. You didn't need the actual card utility. So now that we're caught up with our last wave of support, what's going on here? Well, the chain of events is actually pretty straightforward. There are just some details I wish I knew more about. After Poplar is taken by the Goblin Bikers, Diabellstar begins to chase them down to get the little scrungler back, but at some point, the Goblin's crazy beast goes on a stampede! This wakes up Poplar, who proceeds to eat the beast, as seen in Sinful Spoil Struggle. I do love that Poplar's face unfolds like that, it's very fun, but my first question is, if that power comes out of nowhere, or if this is gonna make some kind of sense later on. The Snake Eye monster we fought so far didn't do anything like this, though it could be argued that Flamberge is itself an evolved form of Poplar as well. It even shares some characteristics with its Diabellstar form, both being fire, but having a different type from Pyro, its original, with Flamberge being an actual dragon, and Snake Eye's Diabellstar being a spellcaster. Although, Crazy Beast is a fiend, so if that was the case it should be a fiend? And maybe it is. This is a combination of the two people, so maybe the typing is coming from Diabellstar, not Crazy Poplar. There could also be a hint in the effect of Sinful Spoil Struggle, but unless the Goblin Bikers have another Sinful Spoil card that we aren't privy to yet, it doesn't make sense that that would be used to destroy Goblin's Crazy Beast, so I'm still at a loss. But regardless of the method, Poplar becomes Snake Eye Diabellstar. Or, like I said, the creature in Snake Eye Diabellstar. I'm sure the name references the team. And we can actually see a lot of Crazy Beast characteristics in this new form, including the big tusks, the horns, the arms, and the bracelets that it was wearing, you know, the whole 9 yards. This basically puts the bikers in their place, but no sooner do they disperse than Diabells shows up, using the power of her Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morion to subdue Crazy Poplar, reverting it to its baby form. Diabellstar goes to engage Diabells in combat to get their little buddy back, which is where that section of the story leaves off. Though, because Diabellstar is now right next to Morion, I'd hazard a guess and say that its soporific qualities also knock out Diabellstar, causing her mind to drift to older, simpler times, which brings us to the next part of our story. White Woods is a series of light spellcaster monsters, mostly, that have a big focus on synchro summoning, using spells and traps to fuel their effects. This sounds pretty costly, effectively every card is some variation of a Summoner Monk, but their own on-theme cards actually prefer it that way, being sent to the field if sent to the grave to activate a monster's effect. First, we have Asteria of the White Woods, a level 2 monster with 0 attack and defense, and you can send a spell or trap card from your hand or field to the grave to special summon a light spellcaster tuner monster from your deck. And if any number of spell or trap cards are sent to the grave to activate a monster effect while this card is in your grave, you can special summon it. This is a great way to summon out the tuners we'll be covering soon, giving us access to our boss adjacent monsters. And if any of our on-theme cards chew up a spell or trap card, or even anything not on theme, you get this back for free. And because this gets us light spellcaster tuners, you know what that means. That's right, it's branded time! Ooh, I can't wait to use this to summon Quem and Cartesia. It's gonna be a blast. Reset of the White Woods is a level 2 monster with 0 attack and defense, and you can send a spell or trap card from your hand or field to the grave to special summon this card from your hand. Then, add a White Woods monster from your deck to your hand except a copy of this card. And if any number of light spellcaster monsters are special summoned from your field during your opponent's turn while this card is in your grave, you can add this card to your hand. This works slightly differently from Asteria, still getting you that additional card when summoned, but Reset doesn't use up your normal summon by itself, and can get any White Woods monster, with Asteria being one of the prime targets, though you can grab your tuners if you are so inclined. And then, if they get summoned during your opponent's turn, you get this card back into your hand from the grave for free, which basically resets it. Rasia of the White Woods is a level 4 tuner monster with 800 attack and 1500 defense, and if you control a White Woods monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can send a spell or trap card from your hand or field to the grave to draw a card, and if this card is in your grave, as a quick effect, you can target a white wood synchro monster you control or that's in your grave to return it to the extra deck, and if you do, special summon this card, but negate its effects. Thankfully, it doesn't have that usual thing where monsters that reborn themselves get banished if they leave the field. The only downside is really that you can't trade in that spell or trap card for a draw. This is a really good grab off of Reset's effect, because then you still don't have to spend your normal summon. The quick summon effect is also going to be useful in triggering Reset's recycling effect while giving you another body for a variety of plays. Synchro, Link, Xyz summoning, you name it. Give this card some time and you'll see what it can do. Silva of the White Woods is a level 4 tuner monster with 1500 attack and 200 defense, and if normal or special summoned, you can add a White Wood spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. And like Resia, if this card is in your grave, you can special summon this as a quick effect by targeting a White Wood synchro monster you control or that's in your grave and return it to the extra deck, but this card's effects are negated. It's much sadder on this one since we have an effect that searches us a card, but thankfully you can grab it off of either your level 2 monsters, and you can synchro climb from there. It's very appropriate that this wolf spellcaster knows how to play a little fetch. Ursiella, Wicked of the White Woods, is a level 6 synchro tuner monster with 2000 attack and 1600 defense, requiring generic materials. If this card is special summoned, you can send a spell or trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard to add a White Woods card or a light spellcaster monster from your deck to your hand. And while on the field, Illusion and Spellcaster synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack, and also they can't be destroyed by your opponent's effects. So, if you choose to make this synchro, as both Asteria and Reset are very good at assembling the pieces for it, all you need is another spell or trap card to feed it to replace it with any of your on-theme cards, or a light spellcaster. And you already know how I feel about light spellcasters. The big advancement here is the static buff, cause this monster actually has 2500 attack, and your opponent's destruction effect removal might as well not exist. Why, it's enough to drive your opponent batty! Silvera, Witch Wolf of the White Woods, is a level 6 synchro tuner monster with 1900 attack and 2400 defense, requiring generic materials. If this card is special summoned, you can change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense position, and while on the field, all Illusion and Spellcaster synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack and deal double piercing battle damage. Oh, slow down here, deck. Okay, I think we may have just found our win condition. Flip down your opponent's whole field, shutting off their effects, and then punish them with our synchro monster attacks. What I super love about this is that it triggers on any kind of special summon, so if you have, say, Whispers of Sinful Spoil on standby, you can summon out Silvera to book the opponent's entire board at will. Time it right, and now you have a field of monsters that can cleave through your opponent's defensive lineup while dealing massive damage, especially if you can get multiple Silvera and Ursiella attack boosts going. See, now I was joking about how the earlier iteration knew how to play fetch, but now we're teaching our opponent's board to roll over. Diabell, Fiendess of the White Woods, is a level 8 Illusion synchro monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, requiring generic material. If this card is synchro summoned using a tuner synchro monster as material, you can target a spell or trap card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. And when your opponent activates a card or effect, as a quick effect, you can send a spell or trap card from your hand or field to the grave to special summon a level 7 or lower tuner synchro monster from your extra deck, grave, or banishment. Wow, that is a gaggle of effects. Presumably, the intended way to make this is with Reset's effect, grabbing Asteria, normal summoning her, using her effect to summon out Resia or Silva, whichever floats your boat at the time, then sync our tuner with one of our little ones to make the synchro tuner of our choice, then use it and our last little one to make Diabell. By doing this, you get to recycle one of your spells and traps, getting you back something nasty, and either using it for its own effect or saving it up to use for other effects to pull synchro tuners out of thin air. Not only can they summon any of the White Woods we've used so far, it can grab any level 7 or below synchro tuner. And while it doesn't count as a synchro summon, which means we can't make good use of cards like shooting Riser Dragon, you still have access to quick sync monsters like Quistron Quandax and TG Mighty Striker, Golden Cloudbeast Malong for some incidental removal, or Denglung if you have any Yang Zings lying around. However, Silvera being a way to flip down the opponent's whole field might just be enough of an option by itself. Also,
Now we can see why these illusion monsters are defeating stuff in battle. They were never illusions in the first place. They were fiends the whole time! Problem solved, everyone. We can go home now. Beware the White Woods is a normal spell card that you can activate if you control a level 6 or higher illusion or spellcaster monster to target a card your opponent controls and to destroy it. And if this card is sent to the grave to activate a monster effect, you can set this card. That last effect is one you're gonna see on all the White Woods spells and traps, along with Whispers of Sinful Spoils, the card we talked about previously, making them very useful for fueling the White Woods effects. Ursiella is in a good position to tutor this up whenever you sync for them if you need some spot removal, but until then you can just ditch it to activate either Reset or Asteria, and let it sit around on the field until you get a big enough monster to activate. Doing this does highly telegraph that line of play though, and does make it vulnerable to Diabell's effect. But that just means that if your opponent wastes the removal on the known card, they'll have to beware the unknown. Legend of the White Woods is a normal spell card that you can activate if you control an illusion or spellcaster monster, letting you add a White Woods monster from your deck to your hand. What I like most about this is that you can send this to the grave to activate your monster effects, reset it, then flip it over immediately to get that search, basically letting you use our White Woods monster effects for free. It's very grand. It also means if you're splashing in any illusion or spellcaster monsters and you don't find the White Woods half of your deck, this can help get you there. It's otherwise not a very complicated card, with all the shadows being cast on the play's walls. It's basically Plato's allegory of the Rhoda. Woes of the White Woods is a normal trap card that special summons a White Woods monster from your hand or deck, then immediately after this effect resolves, you can synchro summon a White Woods monster. Good grief, this is a good card. Any on-theme monster, you can just get it right out of your hand or deck, and then you get a quick sync. It's only for our monsters, sure, but I cannot stress the fact that Silvera is an on-demand, turn off your opponent's field button, as long as you don't have any links to deal with. And this is bound to get better and better the more cards we get in the theme, be they synchros or not. The name may be right, but not really the meaning of it, because when this is resolving, I'll be letting out a big whoa! Lots of woes, if I can help it. Alright, a few tech picks before we get into the story of things. I still stand by the fact that Silvera is our win condition. If we punish our opponent with that double piercing battle damage, they'll be out like a light, so we'll need a good group of spellcaster and illusion monsters, especially of the synchro variety, as well as spells and traps that are not only good, but can help feed our effects to make the most of them. So what can we play to help them out? Well, first up, I think Summoner Monk is an irresistible option here. It's also a spellcaster and can summon either Resea or Silva and lets you go straight into Diabell. Alternatively, you've got rank 4 plays if you so desire. Now, as far as spellcaster and illusion synchros go, the only illusion one right now is Diabell. As for the spellcaster ones that exist in the TCG at time of recording, our options are sparse. Our main focus is making level 6 and 8 monsters, which means common options like Arcanite Magician are out. Explosive Magician might have been good if it could generate its own spell counters, and Tempest Magician is, banned. Despian Lulu Will Lilith can be made with either Resea or Silva and any level 8 monster, but the problem is getting that level 8 monster. Though if you manage to get there, you have a great effect on a body that can get really huge. Maybe the Cartesia Splash can make Gronguinol to bridge the gap? And in that scenario, you may not even have to synchro summon for it. But probably our best pick is Zorua, the Magistus Conflagrant Calamity, which offers you a wealth of options when it comes to the equip effect. You can slap Ivos on there for an extra 1,000 attack and defense to take advantage of the double piercing damage, or equip Nina Ruru for a monster double attack for potentially even more damage. If you're looking for a bit more utility though, Xyz Rilliona isn't bad, as it negates the effects of a monster on board, so you don't have to deal with as much interruption. But we're not restricted to only spellcaster and illusion synchros, since we don't put a lock on any of our monsters. They're just not going to get that double piercing damage. So what kind of options do we have? Well, Muddy Mud Dragon is a powerful gateway into a number of fusion monsters, and if we go into the Albaz pool, this is going to be indispensable in that regard. Stardust Charge Warrior is a great way to get you a free draw, though since Coral Dragon is itself a synchro tuner, it'll probably be more helpful during our synchro climbs. With all of our tuners and light monsters, Visas Omri Tara is great for nabbing any of the Visas field spells
and going to town with any of those themes. But Infernity Doom Archfiend is probably my favorite. Even if your hand isn't empty, it'll still negate a face-up card's effect on the field until the end phase, and then if we land another Ursia or Silva, you can sync that and ideate together for Chaos Angel, thus giving you even more removal, as well as unlocking all of its effects since we used a dark and light monster, keeping our synchros safe and our monsters from being destroyed by battle. Not to mention that we're getting that double attack from IDA, which is pretty good on a 3500 attack body. Our monsters are going to need a resource engine of cards we can pull from to activate their effects. It doesn't matter how good they are, we're eventually going to run out of spells and traps to actually feed to them. Thankfully, a recent addition to the game has joined the crew as probably the best option we could have asked for: the toy cards! You'll want to get Toy Box into rotation as soon as possible, which can set 2 toy monsters to your back row as spells, as long as they have an effect that lets you set them already. They have those effects because they have a little bonus whenever they're sent to the grave after being set that way, but they don't have a really good way to trigger that effect, which is just fine for our Whitewoods monsters because once we set them as spells, well, they're spells. Toy Box effectively gives us 3 spells to spend on our effects off a single card, to say nothing of the bonus effects we get for sending those cards to the grave. Soldier will special summon itself when you do so and gets you a level 4 light monster from our deck as long as Toy Box is still around, which, well, I mean, if you've seen the episode up to this point, you know we have some great targets. And Toy Tank can either act as a body when it summons itself when you do send it to grave from there, but you can also tribute it to special summon any level 6 or lower monster from your hand or grave, which includes our tuner synchros. Then, when you're all finished with those, you can send a Toy Box to the grave for another effect. Easy peasy. And, well, I mean, we have spellcasters, so there is Hidden Village. It feels like I'm recommending that card a lot in these past few episodes. Why am I in a spellcaster bent? As for a silly tech pick, Creature Swap is probably the funniest. This card works best when you're looking to give your opponent a terrible monster, since you'll only ever get your opponent's worst monster, and yes, technically that checks out if our opponent has 1 monster, don't at me. Our goal is to give our opponent a defense position illusion monster. That way, we can keep slapping it with our double piercing battle damage and it won't be destroyed, as long as it's one of the traditional illusion monsters. And one of our best options is a TCG exclusive that hasn't gotten a great reputation as of late, but I'm about to enlighten you. Void Burial the Dragon Undertaker. We'll be wanting to go second as much as possible to take advantage of that double battle damage, so anytime our opponent sends a monster they control to the grave, we have an opportunity to jump this card out of our hand in defense position. Then, we use Creature Swap to give it to our opponent, and would you look at that, it's got 0 defense. With only its own boost, Silvera is punching in for 4,800 damage, so any other spellcaster or illusion synchro monster that has 1,100 or more attack, which is, all of them, can attack in to close things out. Just, make sure the last thing you do is give your opponent Void Burial, otherwise they'll get to weaken your monsters, which isn't very bueno. Alright, that does it for the tech picks. Now what in the world is going on with this prequel? As usual, while the monsters show us who the actors are, it's the spells and traps that are going to be integral to our understanding of the plot. And all of them are rendered in these stylized shadow puppet style images that look like they were taken right out of an old book of fairy tales. Normally, we'd be seeing the play from the opposite side of this screen, just observing the shadows being projected on there, but from our perspective, we get to see how the dolls interact with the shadows they cast, which I think is a nifty touch. It also frames these events not just as having happened in the past, but the ancient past, long enough for there to be actual legends about what happened. This implies that, even though it may seem like only a few decades take place between tiny baby Asteria and adult Diabellstar, something may have happened to prolong their life, or was even put into some kind of suspended animation. Though I don't think that has much of a bearing on the story at all, just a little bit of background flavor. The legend shows our 4 primary characters, each distinguishable from their silhouettes and colors. Asteria and Ursia are on one side, Reset and Silva are on the other, with Diabell taking center stage. But they all seem to be existing together without there being an actual problem. No one is lashing out, and even though the mentors are standing between Diabell and the children, there's no threatening movements happening that would imply that they're being shielded or that there's any kind of conflict. So while I had assumed going into this that Diabell was some kind of nasty threat deep in the woods that the mentors tried to keep the children away from, Diabell may actually be a matronly figure looking after all of them. And if Diabell is a title, it would make sense why it was passed down to our two main characters. But it's not like they're perceived as entirely benevolent either. Beware the White Woods shows a generic puppet standing at the edge of the forest looking at the creeping shadows within. So outsiders are encouraged not to enter, but the current residents are fine as far as we can tell. Until Woes of the White Woods happens, which shows our mentors having been transformed into their Sinful Spoil forms, with that same large, looming shadow from Beware. A shadow that I assume is Diabell, since we don't see any other entities in the woods, though I think I have an answer for that too. See, if Diabell isn't the big bad here, then the dark presence has to be tied to the apples that we see throughout the forest. The motif of the forbidden fruit is a pretty Abrahamic legend which doesn't line up with anything we've seen so far, but we actually haven't had a consistent mythology to pull from so far in the story. The snake eyes reference the Lithuanian myth of the grass snake, the Goblin Biker's kanji references the night parade of 100 demons, so that's Japanese mythology, and Sinful Spoils Morion references Morrigan, an Irish goddess of death and war. So the idea might be that this whole story is specifically meant to be a combination of a lot of different mythologies. So when the mysterious entity that resides within the apples whispers to the young students, they fall for the dark being's trick and partake of the forbidden fruit, unleashing the creature trapped within. What exactly happens past this point is unclear. Woes shows a bat and wolf, which is clearly a reference to Ursia and Silva, but we're not entirely sure that they're in their full Sinful Spoils form at this point, since even their synchros have those bat and wolf features. But because the art doesn't show them being combined with Hysteria yet, I think it's safe to say that they're not Sinful Spoils. Yet. They fly into battle against the dark entity, which I'm sure causes their next transformation. Another thing we can infer is that Diabell transfers some of their essence into Hysteria and Reset. We don't see this happen, but in the story so far, colors have been a very important factor in identifying characters, and as it turns out, Diabell is the only one with two colors, green and purple, each of which we see with diabellstar and diabells. Diabellstar's is pretty easy to notice. Her right eye turns green when wielding the power of the Sinful Spoils, and Diabell's left eye glows purple in much the same way under the same circumstances. It's hard to see considering the color of her eyes, but this is also confirmed in the reference art. And would you look and see which of Diabell's eyes are which color? So, where does that leave us? Here's what I think. The dreaded White Woods is a place of danger that nearby villagers avoid at all cost, as it's ruled by a great and powerful fiend and her loyal coven of witches. In truth, the woods contain an ancient evil that Diabell is determined to contain, specifically an evil that seeks to corrupt the hearts and minds of mortals, so she spreads the tale of her own fiendish nature to keep the weak-hearted far away from the woods. But Diabell can't do it alone, or needs to ensure that there will be people to keep the woods safe in her absence. So Diabell employs the help of two witches, who themselves have their own apprentices. They're taught the ways of the woods and of the Sinful Spoils, creatures transformed into powerful artifacts of great power, a technique derived from the very evil sealed within these woods. But one day, the evil presence convinced the youngest students to partake in one of the forest's ripe red apples and thus unleashed the terrors within. Ursia and Silva would attempt to subdue the shadowy presence but stand no chance, and are turned into the Sinful Spoils we know them as today. Diabell, seeing that there isn't a way to contain things at this point, begins to transfer her powers to the remaining students, but before they can escape, Reset is captured by the evil presence. Because of this, both Ursiella and Silvera are entrusted to Hysteria, and is tasked with finding the one artifact that can stand a chance against this creature, Snake Eye, the original Sinful Spoil, and will spend many years trying to find its resting place, in a temple far away from the evil presence's influence. But
what of Reset? Under the thrall of the dark creature, she is also tasked with hunting down the original Sinful Spoil, being granted the title of Original Sin Keeper, and is granted Morion to assist in the hunt. This potentially explains why Reset wasn't herself turned into a Sinful Spoil, as they probably don't do a good job of wielding other Sinful Spoils, though there's likely some other underlying aspect that determines whether or not something can be a Sinful Spoil. Many years pass and diabellstar continues to seek. Diabells posts a bounty to help hunt her down, composed just well enough to recognize her, while abstract enough and unflattering enough to get on her rival's nerves. But eventually, diabellstar does find the temple, overrun with large dark branches, much like the ones in the now blighted White Woods. It seems the dark presence has found its way here after all, but regardless, the Seeker of Sinful Spoils fights through the tree-inspired minions, culminating in the dragonic beast that emerged from the original Sinful Spoil itself. After its defeat, the small creature Poplar is extracted, but nothing seems to have changed. Ursiella and Silvera still maintain their Sinful Spoil forms. Annoyed that her mission doesn't have a clear next step, diabellstar wanders into the city where she crosses paths with the Goblin Bikers. Noticing she is very deep in thought and very distracted, the Goblin Bikers abscond with Poplar, leading to the events that cause our little rascal to absorb Crazy Beast, knocking aside the Bikers and alerting Diabells, bringing the two rivals into conflict once again. But before we get to the new antagonists, we need to catch up with some previous archetypes that got some updates this pack. So we're going to lump them all together right here. We'll be covering Goblin Bikers, Sinful Spoils, and White Forest, the official name of the theme I previously had down as White Woods. And speaking of names that aren't exactly going to survive the localization process, badass Goblin Bikers, a level 6 Dark Fiend monster with 2400 attack and 0 defense, and if you control no monsters, or all monsters you control are goblin monsters, you can normal summon this card without tributing. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower goblin monster from your deck. And if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a card on the field and attach it to your Goblin Xyz monster as material. Wait, that's kinda stacked. It hits board, you get a free goblin. It hits the grave, you absorb a monster as material as long as you have a Goblin Xyz monster. Kind of like a New Age Silent Honor arc. It's kinda goofy. The only problem is actually getting this onto the board. Unlike its contemporaries, Badass is a level 6 monster, so you need to fulfill the no tributing requirement to get this onto the field like any other monster. But we do have some other options. Mean Merciless can drop this out of your hand with its effect, and with Grand Bash, the extra normal summon means you aren't always going to waste your only normal summon on this. And speaking of Bash, not only does Badass give you a 6 or other goblins can copy onto it to make Crazy Beast, you can combine their levels together to make rank 9s, and while Calamities is no longer an option, thank God, Enter Blatnir is still a really flexible utility monster, Hyperiton gives you some funny negation options, and a Generator Leviton is some great removal. And, big bonus for us, we get to spend the next few months speculating what the replacement name is gonna be. Let me know your guess down below. Personally, I'm going for the good, the bad, and the Goblin Bikers. Goblin Biker Grand Imprisonment is a quick play spell card that tributes a monster to special summon a goblin monster from your deck, but it can't attack this turn. When a monster declares an attack, you can banish this card from your grave and attach any number of material from your Goblin Xyz monsters to have all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls lose 1000 attack for each material detached until the end of this turn. Hey look, another way to get Badass onto the field. It's not as easy as activating it, you do need that tribute, but because it can eat any monster for it, this works well with any free material you just slap onto the board. And while that monster can't attack, we're an Xyz deck. We'll just be using it as material anyway. The grave effect is also pretty solid. Even just attaching one can be huge. A monster going down by a whole 1000 points can really take the fuel out of their engine while you run over them. Though nothing stopping you from detaching 3 material to completely gut their attack power if you have the spares. So we're looking at a card that helps us get the right Goblin Biker into rotation, or really any goblin that we want, and is the triumphant debut of our latest biker, Dromojamon. Glad to see we finally got that Digimon crossover. The Fiend of the White Forest is a quick play spell card that has you tributing a synchro monster to target a face-up card on the field and negate its effects until the end of the turn.
Then, if you attributed a White Forest Synchro monster at activation, you can special summon an illusion monster from your graveyard. And like many of the White Forest spell and trap cards, if sent to the grave to activate a monster effect, you can set this card. That makes it a fantastic card to feed to your White Forest monsters when going first, because you aren't likely to get any targets for this effect at that time. So you can use it to enable a non-theme monster, then it'll come back to help you on a later turn. The Synchro monsters are easy to recycle thanks to Rusia and Sylvie, and because you can revive an illusion if you attributed an on-theme monster, you can basically tribute Diabell and bring it right back. Heck, we even get another instance of the art telling us how to use the card optimally, as well as adding a bit more depth to the lore that I cannot wait to get into. But point of order, Diabell is not the fiend of the White Forest, they're an illusion monster. Are you telling me that these fairy tales aren't 100% accurate? Sinful Spoils Offenders is a normal trap card that you can activate if your opponent special summons any number of monsters from the deck or extra deck and you control a diabellstar monster card. It has you targeting a monster they control and shuffling it into the deck. Also, during the damage step, if your diabellstar monster battles an opponent's monster, you can banish this card from your grave, and that opponent's monster's attack becomes halved until the end of the turn. This reminds me a lot of Toon Briefcase, a kind of on-summon retaliation, though this is better because it can hit any monster your opponent controls, not just the summoned monster that triggered it, so it's much more flexible in that regard. And note that it checks to see if you control a diabellstar monster card. This means it'll work not only when the Black Witch is in your monster zone, but also if you have Snake Eye Diabellstar in the back row. And then we have a grave effect that debuffs a monster fighting our Diabellstar, but that's just icing on the cake. As far as Sinful Spoils cards go, it's nice, but nowhere near the level of playability that our other targets have. If people were hesitant to run Sinful Spoils of Betrayal, this one isn't going to be much more convincing. I mean, just look at it. Diabellstar is even holding the Ursiella Scythe like it's some kind of red flag. Goblin Biker Grand Crisis is a continuous trap card that has you targeting a goblin monster you control and a monster your opponent controls, or a goblin monster in your grave and a monster in your opponent's grave, and banish both of them. You can send this face-up card from your spell and trap zone to the grave, then target 5 of your banished goblin monsters with different names and special summon them. You can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. This gives us some pretty sweet removal, but I'm not totally sold. True, because it banishes both, not both targets, you can do something with the goblin that you targeted before the effect resolves and still get that removal. But the fact that you can only target a goblin in the same zone as the card you want to get rid of is pretty frustrating. It would have been a lot better if you could say, target a goblin on your field or grave to target a monster on your opponent's field or in their grave instead, but it's still pretty nifty. And once again, it comes with a secondary effect that isn't really the main reason you should play it, but it's nice to have it. Goblin Bikers, and once again goblins in general, don't really have a lot of banishing in their back pocket, so you're relying on Grand Crisis or some off-theme cards to fuel that, which can be devastating if it resolves, true, but is basically a pipe dream. It'll take a lot more to jailbreak this theme. Alright, that covers all the updates from previous themes. Now it's time to lock in on the new lore archetype, the Asomina. What's the deal with them? Well, they're a series of Dark Illusion fusion monsters, that's right, no main deck monsters, that feed upon the Sinful Spoils cards, even more so than the previous themes. And speaking of previous themes, a few of them are corrupted versions of our White Forest mentors, mirroring their stats and capabilities to devastating effect. First up is Asomina Mew Ursialago, a level 6 monster with 2000 attack and 2400 defense, requiring an illusion monster and a light spellcaster monster as material. While on the field, monsters your opponent controls lose 500 attack and defense for each Asomina monster you control. And if this card is fusion summoned, you can add an Asomina or Sinful Spoils card from your deck to your hand. Also, if this card is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can add a Sinful Spoils spell card from your deck to your hand. This is a pretty fantastic start. Hitting the board with a self-sufficient 500-point debuff is pretty nice, and it only grows as you develop your board. It immediately gets you back a card, and gets you another when it's destroyed, so no matter what Mew is doing, it's always getting you advantage. It may not be a vampire, but it's enough power to drive you batty. Asomina Ria Silvera is a level 6 monster with 1900 attack and 1500 defense, requiring an illusion monster and a light spellcaster monster as material. While on the field, all battle damage from your Asomina monsters inflicted to your opponent is doubled, except when it comes from copies of this card. When your opponent activates a card or effect as a quick effect, you contribute this card to negate the effect, and if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can add a Sinful Spoils trap card from your deck to your hand. Ah, more damage doubling, you love to see it. You do need help from your teammates to actually make use of it, but with Muse stat reduction, you're in pretty good company. Not to mention that while it doesn't destroy, Rhea is an Omni Negate, so it's in a great position to help keep your board protected. Granted, doing so is at odds with its own floating effect, but let's be real, our trap cards are okay at best, so it's not a terrible trade-off. Also, we can all agree that this is the best Cerberus in the whole game, Asomina Soul Erisichathon is a level 6 monster with 2700 attack and 0 defense, requiring an illusion monster and a fiend monster as material. If this card is fusion summoned, you can target a card on the field and send it to the graveyard, and during each standby phase, you can target an Asomina or Sinful Spoils card in your grave and add it to your hand. Yup, that's each standby phase, so you'll be positioned to recycle a ton of cards very quickly. And let's just say that's going to be very important for our later support. But that's not all there is to like here. As a fusion that requires a fiend monster, this can be made with Chimera Fusion, and actually fits right into the theme. The recovery might not be as useful in those piles, but if Asomina ever gets integrated into those Chimera decks, this will be a stupendous addition. Though I'd be careful about adding Erisichathon on such a flimsy basis. You wouldn't want that to be the sole reason you bring it on board. Asomina Moa Regina is a level 8 monster with 3000 attack and 2000 defense, requiring an illusion monster and a level 6 or higher fiend monster as material. It can target an illusion monster in your grave except a copy of this card and special summon it. And when a Sinful Spoils or Asomina card or effect is activated as a quick effect, you can target up to 2 cards on the field and destroy them. Here it is, our big boss monster, and it's kind of a doozy. Because it can revive an illusion every turn, we can keep getting back our Asominas as long as they've been properly summoned, benefiting from their effects every turn. And when we use an on-theme effect or a Sinful Spoils one, we also get to pop 2 cards. It's very simple, but very effective. It's just a shame the game lacks a good level 6 or higher fiend monster that can be used as the second half of this card's fusion material requirements. Nope, can't think of any outrageously powerful level 6 or higher fiend monsters, especially in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That would be patently absurd! Alright, that covers all of our fusions, and now it's time for those spells and traps. Sacred Asomina is a normal spell card that has you revealing an Asomina fusion monster from your extra deck and sending a Sinful Spoils card from your hand and or field to the grave for every 4 levels the revealed monster has, and special summoning it. This fusion is treated as a fusion summon, so you get all the benefits of your on-fusion summon effects, and is treated as being properly summoned. Though if you want to send any set Sinful Spoil cards, you will have to reveal them first. And while this card is in the grave, you can target an Asomina monster you control or that's in your grave to shuffle the target into the deck, and if you do, add this card into your hand. This is very reminiscent of the White Forest Mentor's ability to recycle your synchros to bring them back to the field. Gonna have to revisit that implication later. But yeah, if you're playing any of the other diabellstar lore archetypes, Sacred Asomina will let you access the fusions at the cost of consuming your Sinful Spoils. Because at the risk of tipping my hand a bit too soon, this isn't the last time we'll be seeing that effect, and it's very recyclable. Especially because 2 of our Asominas float into more Sinful Spoils when they're destroyed, giving you more fuel for the fire, while Soul gets you a Sinful Spoil or Asomina card back from your grave every turn. So while this seems costly on the surface, a lot of it actually pays for itself, though I think this card is showing up a bit late. There's a whole Yu-Gi-Oh game called the Sacred Cards. You'd think this would have been included. Asomina Ophilatus is a quick play spell card that can be activated during the main phase to summon out an Asomina fusion monster from your extra deck, basically like how Sacred does it. Also, during your main phase, you can banish this card from your grave, then target an Asomina monster in your grave and special summon it. You can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. So now you can deploy your Asominas at quick speed, which is super useful thanks to Soul's removal, and lets you bring your Asominas back on future turns, giving you outstanding longevity. This works really well with Moa because it can then revive more Asominas, and the advantage just spirals out from there. A lot of your plays are going to be derived from this card specifically, so you really do owe it a debt of gratitude. Sinful Spoils Deception is a continuous spell card that lets you tribute a monster from your hand or field to add an Asomina card from your deck to your hand. If any number of monsters are sent to your opponent's grave and you control an Asomina monster, except during the damage step, you can make your opponent lose 1500 life points, and if you do, you gain 1500 life points. And during the end phase, if this card is in your grave because it was sent there from the spell and trap zone this turn while face up, you can set it. Oh yeah, this card is a huge win, not just for Asomina, but for White Forest as well. If you have any of the spellcasters send this while face up on the field to the graveyard for their effects, you can set it back to your field, giving you a way to use it as fuel over and over again. And the same applies for Asomina, but even better. You tribute a monster with this to get Asomina Sacred or Ophelitis, then send Deception to summon out any of our level 6s. Then, during the end phase, you get Deception back. So as long as your opponent doesn't throw any removal at Deception, you'll have a free card to fuel these effects over and over again. And it's even a very lore-appropriate loop as well, as it mimics the eternal torment that the Mentors now have to live through. Yay! Asomina Hamartia is a normal trap card that can also summon out Asomina fusion monsters, kinda like how Sacred and Ophelitis does. However, instead of sending Sinful Spoils cards to the grave, you instead shuffle Sinful Spoils from your grave and or banishment into your deck for every 4 levels the fusion monster has, and it's also treated as a fusion summon. And while this card is in the grave, you can banish this card to target a Sinful Spoils spell or trap card in your grave and set it, but it cannot be activated this turn. And you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. So you trade out the speed of the previous Asomina summoning cards, and in exchange you basically get to summon them for free while recycling your Sinful Spoils cards. Very neat. Like with Ophelitis, this can bring out Soul at quick speed, though this time you aren't restricted to only using it during the main phase, so you can do some battle phase shenanigans with it. And on top of everything else, it also gets you Sinful Spoils back into semi-immediate rotation, putting them back on the field and giving them a second shot at usability. It's a fantastic search off of Mew's on summon effect, and I look forward to it being used in just about every Sinful Spoils deck out there as a way to get bodies onto the board, remove our opponent's stuff, and get more usage out of our wanteds. But as a trap card, it can be a bit unwieldy to use, so it's not without its own fatal flaws. Alright, so that's all of the Asomina cards, but what do we do with them? Well, without a robust main deck core, this is another series of cards that work best in other themes instead of as a dedicated strategy, at least for now. As a suite of extra deck monsters, they don't brick your main deck, but do give you access to a number of vital effects that can help you push through a number of board states, as long as you have the Sinful Spoils to spend on them. So what can we play to help them out? We've already talked about how the fusions work well with the Chimera pile, which might make you think they also work well with Branded, which is currently Chimera's closest friends. But you'll need to keep the following in mind. Blazing Cartesia does not work very well with Rhea and Mew, because that effect only fusion summons level 8 and higher monsters. So even though they're a light spellcaster, it's not going to make for the best material using its own effect. However, both Lubellion and Branded Albion can fusion summon level 8 and lower monsters, so those can use Cartesia, or any other Dogmatica related monster, if you don't need those effects to access some of your other wild fusions. Just about every Sinful Spoil card works well with the Asominas because you need them to fuel the summoning effects, but what are the best ones we can use? Well, Subdual gets some illusion monsters into rotation to use as fusion material. Susurrus is another way we can get our Asominas back into rotation while saving another monster. And Morion is cool because you can send it to summon an Asomina, then reset it from the graveyard because you control an illusion monster. Oh, and while we're on the subject, a little trick you can do with your Sinful Spoils to make the most of your Asominas. You know how you can activate board breakers like Raigeki or Harpy's Feather Duster, and then later on that same chain activate Forbidden Droplets, sending that spell card to the graveyard to get a little extra negation out of it? Well, you can do the same thing with Ophelitis. Because it's a quick play spell, you can activate any of your Sinful Spoils cards, and then chain our quick play Asomina spell, sending that Sinful Spoils card to the graveyard. At that point, it's not like you even spent any cards to activate it at all. At least when it comes to summoning our level 6s. For the level 8s, we are going to have to spend at least one more. We're also going to need a healthy supply of illusion monsters to use as fusion material. Diabells is basically a given, because we'll be sending Sinful Spoils to the grave left, right, and center. Master Tau the Chanter can revive your Asominas or any other illusions that make their way into the graveyard when it hits board. And Big Winged Baphomet can do something similar if sent to the grave as fusion material, which is useful not just for the Chimera line of fusions, but also as material for Soul. The new Gazelle can also add any illusion monster from deck to hand if used as fusion material, but Beast doesn't have quite the same crossover with Asomina as Baphomet does. It's also hard to ignore the usefulness of Nightmare Apprentice getting you any illusion on summon for just a discard, which can include the illustrious Nightmare Magician. Stealing monsters and removal is a pretty sweet loadout of effects to have on a single monster, and should be included in any deck that can support it. As for the fiends we'll need if we want to actually fusion summon these monsters, I know I was being a bit facetious earlier, but to spell it out, Fiendsmith is a strong option. Yubel also provides a lot of high-level fiends, and the protection provided by Phantom of Yubel is most certainly welcome. Unchained has a few options, but its tendency to lock you into only summoning fiends doesn't really mesh well with all of the illusions we want to put on board. A pretty good consideration might be the Labyrinth monsters. Many are level 6 or over, and now you can back up your monster lineup with a terrifying spread of normal trap cards. Heck, Hamartia itself is a normal trap, so you can set it off of Lady Labyrinth. Radian, the multi-dimensional kaiju, is also a nifty inclusion, as it can act both as a way to polymorph an opponent's monster into a vanilla, or as fusion material for some of your Asominas. Or, with super polymerization, it can do both. As for a silly tech pick, the new Lord of the Missing Barrows seems to be positioned very well here. We're going to be playing spells and traps not only because of our Asomina's back row, but for all the Sinful Spoils we have access to as well. And not only is this a big fiend, it also gives you some cracked removal when summoned from the hand. Alright, that's everything I have to say about the cards. Now it's time for the fun part, the lore. But not necessarily the lore from this set, yet. Sure, the cards we get offer a neat addition to the story, but the real sauce comes from the recently released valuable book EX4, which details the story up through its third installment, the introduction of Diabells. So I want to do a quick skim of all the info so we're on the same page. Prologue 1 of the Sinful Spoils story talks about how demons deceive humans to turn them into living puppets. But a puppet doesn't need a soul, so the demons actually extract the souls of the sinful, which turn into cursed relics. And that's how we get the Sinful Spoils. The demons feel a bit out of left field at the moment, but trust me, they'll be coming up pretty soon. Prologue 2 is more of a scene setter than anything else. It's a conversation between some tavern patrons about a sour encounter with the demon that seeks the Sinful Spoils, and that she's going after some ruins in the southeast, looking for a weird eye. And since this little snippet is accompanied by the wanted poster, it's pretty clear they're talking about diabellstar. A little info block also talks about how the Sinful Spoils should be impossible for normal humans to use, but diabellstar has a special spell that bypasses this restriction. Story 1 unfolds pretty much like it's shown on the cards. The temple that diabellstar is looking for is the Divine Temple of the Snake Eyes, which has been corrupted by the presence of the Snake Eye Sinful Spoil, and diabellstar is forced to fight the Spoil's many minions. It is noted that Flamberge Dragon was once the guardian creature of these lands, but has now become a twisted version of its former self. The battle was hard fought, but diabellstar eventually wins out, using the power of the Sinful Spoils she has already collected, Ursiella and Silvera. However, the battle damaged the Snake Eye Sinful Spoil, causing it to crack and eventually shatter, leaving behind Poplar, a turn of events that diabellstar was not expecting. Story 2 finds us back in the underground city that appears to be the population hub for this story. Diabellstar is eager to hit the hay and then do some research on Poplar to figure out what the heck is going on here, and that's where the Goblin Bikers come into play. Turns out, this isn't the first time they've tried to mess with the Black Witch, as they had constantly tried to bring her in for the huge bounty on her head, though after a number of defeats, began settling for just stealing things from her. And this time was no exception. Poplar was fast asleep, so after a quick distraction, the goblins ran off with the fresh Sinful Spoil, with diabellstar giving chase the second she finds out. But to even the odds, the leader of the Goblin Bikers, Gabonga, unleashes the Goblin's Crazy Beast, a magical beast that the bikers hadn't been able to tame so they could use it as a mount, similar to the rest of their tricked out beasts. The monster's rampage is what finally gets Poplar out of its nap. And this is where the book drops a little bit of a bombshell on us, stating that Crazy Beast had apparently swallowed a sinful spoil of its own, Aethon, which had once belonged to Gabonga, which it had retrieved after a big journey. Poplar, sensing this power, latches onto it immediately. It unhinges its jaw and sucks up all of that magical power, transforming into a gigantic creature. Diabellstar then did the only logical thing, chaining up this new Poplar and using it as a flail to beat up the remaining goblin bikers. The bikers then make their retreat in the face of this overwhelming power, but in the blink of an eye, Diabells shows up, the Elzette that Diabellstar knew from her younger years, and by using the power of Morion, sends Diabellstar and Poplar into a deep slumber. This is where the book ends, leading into the White Forest events that we talked about last episode. In fact, Rage of the Abyss gives us a couple more cards to add context to what happens in those flashbacks. The Fiend of the White Forest shows Diabell partaking of one of those apples from within the woods. Presumably this means that in the art of Susurrus of the Sinful Spoils, the two rookies don't actually eat the fruit, but instead show it to Diabell, who then consumes the fruit, causing the eruption of the dark presence within the forest. We also get to see the mentors being overtaken by this dark presence in Sinful Spoil's deception. Presumably what's happening here is that the demons mentioned in the book are now removing their souls to puppet their bodies, which we will eventually see later as their Asomina forms. Those souls will then be retrieved by Diabellstar, who will use them on her journey moving forward. And that leads us to the modern day. It seems that both the Goblin Bikers and the Diabellstar have been taken to prison. We're not quite sure who made the arrest, but with Diabellstar having such a huge bounty on her head, it would be pretty easy for the local authorities to bring her in after she was rendered unconscious. Though I like to think that it was the Goblin Bikers that actually turned her in, seeing an opportunity now that she was unconscious, but then they get thrown into jail because they're just as big of a band of hoodlums as Diabellstar is. One member of the Goblin Biker crew comes to make a great escape as seen in Grand Imprisonment, but they aren't the only one, as Asomina Soul Erisichathon bursts in as well, seen in Goblin Biker Grand Crisis. But the Asomina aren't here for a bunch of ankle biters, they want Diabellstar and her sinful spoils. We can see in Ophiletus that Mew, Urcielago, and Rhea Silvera are staring her down, but before we can go into the epic showdown between them, let's take a look at some of those names. Namely, what in the heck is an Asomina? Well, check this out. Azami is the Japanese word for thistles, and thistles are the plants that God cursed the earth with when Adam and Eve ate the fruit of knowledge. You know, the original sin, the original sinful spoils, like the apple-esque fruits within the White Forest. The Abrahamic God is furious right now. And now we pivot from Bible references to Greek, specifically Ophiletus, which is Greek for debtor, but is meant to refer to sins. And that's my segue into talking about these fusions. With the wolf and bat motifs, it's pretty clear that these two are the soulless husks of Sylvie and Rucia. And we know they're soulless because of the info we got from the valuable book. The dark presence within the White Forest is probably one of these demons that goes around puppeteering bodies, with the fruits being used to taint these souls with sin, giving these demons a way to latch onto their souls to rip them out of their bodies. Now, the real mentors, those are with Diabellstar in the form of the Sinful Spoils, but that begs the question, what's going on with the other two fusions? Well, Soul Erisichathon is tough to place. It doesn't resemble anything that we've seen before, so we have to look at the rest of the card, and it reveals some fantastic information. See, Soul is a level 6 monster with 2700 attack and 0 defense, requiring a Fiend monster as fusion material. And a Goblin's Crazy Beast is a rank 6 Fiend monster with 2700 attack and 0 defense. And sure, Soul looks nothing like Crazy Beast, but I want to turn our attention back to a little nugget we discovered from the valuable book. Crazy Beast had consumed a sinful spoil, Aethon. Now check this out. Erysichthon is the name of the king of Thessaly in Greek mythology. He cut down a very important tree, and as Greek tales tend to be, things take a very bad turn. Demeter was pretty fond of that tree, so cursed Erysichthon to constantly starve forever. And Aethon is a word that means blazing or burning, and is specifically applied to Erysichthon to describe his burning hunger. So now we're facing off against the puppet form of the soul that Crazy Beast ate, alongside the puppet form of the two mentors, a transformation that we see in Sinful Spoils Deception. This also explains why Crazy Beast and Erysichthon look nothing alike. It's because we actually haven't seen Erysichthon's original form. Crazy Beast only ate the soul of that person, so maybe sometime in the future we'll get a better look at who Erysichthon used to be. Oh, and look, while we were explaining all that, it looks like Diabellstar has conquered the attacking Asomina as seen in Sinful Spoils Offenders, with each Sinful Spoil standing triumphantly over their puppet bodies. Soul doesn't seem to be present here, they may be going after the Goblin Bikers, though the only other Goblin Biker card here is Badass, which shows them all assembled and even on Crazy Beast's head, but there's no soul in the picture, so we're not sure exactly what happens to it after the break-in, though I'm putting my money on it escorting someone else. But before we get too much into that, let's shift gears to our last Asomina, Moa Regina. And they have some pretty interesting features. Not the least of which is that it gives me big Albazoa vibes, but I don't currently have anything more than it is also big, white, and spooky, so this theory is going in the back pocket. Though I think it's notable to say that the weird crown on the back of its head with those gold spikes does kind of look like Dogmatica Maximus's headpiece, just saying. What's more prominent here is Moa's wings. The black feathers are much like the ones that you can see on Diabell's right sleeve, and they also have these long purple spines along them, much like her nails on that same hand, which is very curious. But the big detail that caught my eye is the snake tail we can see at the top right, which in context of all of these forbidden fruit, feels like this is an indicator that this is the great darkness within the White Forest that tempted the students into unleashing the ancient evil, much like how the snake tempted Adam and Eve. But it's not the only place that we see Moa. Hamartia shows Diabell's has returned to the White Forest, now looking much darker than it was before, who appears to have an audience with Moa, holding Poplar under her arm. Now, the word Hamartia is used to describe a fatal flaw in a protagonist, so in the context of this card, I think we're supposed to take away that this is that Diabell's is using Poplar to get close to Moa to get her revenge, thinking that she's powerful enough to subdue this great demon all on her own. Alternatively, Diabell's is using Poplar as some kind of bartering chip, hoping to get back her mentors, thinking that the great demon will follow through with a deal like that. But no matter what her intentions, I'm sure things are destined to go very, very wrong here. And that's where our story leaves off, at least for now. Diabellstar, recently victorious over the demons that had controlled her mentors' body, will now find a way back to the forest that traumatized her and her companions, hoping to save Poplar and prevent a calamity from happening after the demons get a hold of the original Sinful Spoil. Now, normally I attempt to section these cards off into their individual archetypes to help make sure you can take those cards and apply them to their appropriate decks. However, as we're in the late second year of support, we are seeing some intense symptoms of brandification here, with the archetypes overlapping onto one another, facilitating a big pile of all the themes put together. So I'll be covering these cards in a similar fashion. We're going to explain how each of these new releases work, what they do, and how they fit into their particular themes before we move on to the lore at large. Asomina Elzet of the White Forest is a level 2 light illusion monster with 0 attack and defense, and you can reveal this card in your hand to special summon a White Forest or Asomina monster from your hand. During your main phase, you can fusion summon an Asomina fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as material. And if this card is sent to the grave as synchro material, you can add a Sinful Spoils card from your deck to your hand. That's right, we've got a total of 3 archetypes wrapped up into a single card, and it's really showing how powerful card design is getting. getting these days. Like, it's essentially a free special summon from your hand with no restrictions, because this is both a White Forest and an Asomina card that you can special summon with that reveal effect. You know, normally they'd say something like, summon a different White Forest or Asomina. As it is now, this is basically a sprite starter, but that all sets it up to be a beautiful enabler for both the White Woods and Asomina themes. It's a level 2 non-tuner that's easy to use and grabs you a card out of what has to be one of the best pools of cards I've ever seen in this game, and it actually provides a fusion effect for your Asominas instead of just having to use the Asomina cards that eat Sinful Spoils for your fusion summons. Now, sadly, you're not able to use it to facilitate both archetypes at the same time, but is a very strong enabler for both, and can help pivot between the two if need be if you're playing both. And hey, a card that facilitates synchros and fusions? They may not work at the same time, but they certainly work in harmonic synchro fusion. Queen of the Asomina is a level 8 Dark Illusion monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense that is always treated as a Sinful Spoil card. When your Asomina or White Forest monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can target a Sinful Spoil spell or trap card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. And if this card is sent to the graveyard or is banished from your hand or field by an activated effect, you can special summon this card to the field. This includes when being used as fusion material like with Asomina LZ, or when being sent to the graveyard by the Asomina spell and trap cards that are used for summoning out the fusions. And it's a very familiar effect, though I don't know if Dramaturge of Despia is able to prosecute this copyright case considering all of the dead he's come down with. So it's pretty easy to deploy this despite the level, and then lets you get your Sinful Spoil cards back from the graveyard by winning combats, something you want to be doing anyway. Well, okay, that's not true. Once again, illusions should not be destroying anything in battle, but I guess I've just got to accept that illusions play by different rules in this universe. I don't know. Snake Eyes Damned Dragon is a level 8 Fire Dragon fusion monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring a Snake Eye monster and an illusion monster as material, and must either be fusion summoned or special summoned by sending 2 face-up monster cards from your spell and trap zone to the graveyard. If this card is special summoned, you can target a face-up monster on the field and place it face-up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. Oh no, the boy's been re-dragonated! This is kind of a funny card to add to the Snake Eye lineup, giving you a fusion option in case you want to mix the Asomina fusions and Snake Eyes together, which people have already been doing, so good on them for being on top of things. But because it just says you can use any 2 monsters in your spell and trap zone, you can play this in a variety of decks like Crystal Beasts and maybe even Plunder Patrol to get out a huge monster that is also removal, effectively being a copy of Sinful Spoils of Subversion Snake Eye that you keep in your extra deck, pushing monsters into the spell and trap zone, though it also has some utility in theme as a way to set up other combos. For instance, Flamberge's effect to put a monster in the back row is only an ignition effect during your turn, but there is a way to use it during your opponent's turn. Because of Flamberge's ability to summon monsters from the back row during the opponent's turn, when you summon Damned Dragon, you can have it put itself into the spell and trap zone when summoned. Then, have Flamberge bring out Damned Dragon during the opponent's turn to push a monster into the back row as disruption. And now you have 2 level 8 monsters for rank 8 shenanigans if you're so inclined. It's a pretty simple card all things considered, but it's gonna have a lot of focus when we talk about the lore. But get used to it now because we are not keeping this name around when it comes to the TCG. Damn. It's just so fun, it rolls off the tongue. Saint Asomina is a level 10 Dark Illusion fusion monster with 0 attack and 4000 defense, requiring a level 6 or higher fusion monster and a level 6 or higher synchro monster as material. While on the field, your opponent cannot target this card, cards they control, and cards in their graveyard or banishment with card effects. Also, they take any battle damage that you would have taken. Also, if this card was fusion summoned this turn as a quick effect, you can special summon a level 9 or lower Asomina monster from your deck or extra deck. So because it's level 10, you will have to spend 2 Sinful Spoil cards when using your Asomina spell and trap cards that summon your fusion, so it's a bit pricey. And unfortunately, it's still going to be pricey if you hard fusion for it, because you need 2 high-leveled extra deck monsters to do that, though does make for a very funny super polymerization target. But for what it's worth, you do get a second Asomina monster to pair with this after you summon it, so you get 2 monsters for the bigger cost, giving you a lot of flexibility on the effects you have access to. And then we've got to talk about what Saint Asomina actually does on its own. True, it's not a big mover or shaker, basically being a bundle of continuous effects, but not only does it give targeting protection, it also hoses a lot of opponents' strategies, specifically ones that need to target their own cards to function. This halts a lot of things that revive cards from the graveyard, give cards stat boosts, and many more, all while being untargetable itself. It even gives you a way to play like Mikonko, letting you run your tiny monsters into your opponent's big ones for damage in lieu of needing to set up a big boss yourself to push for game. Which is, ironically, an effect that pairs very well with illusion monsters that are not part of this lore, as they won't be destroyed by battle, making them a repeatable source of damage. Saint Asomina is an outrageous card, though the biggest problem is telling it apart from a Traptrix monster. Hey, Queen, they've already got the market cornered on big carnivorous plant ladies. You're gonna have to find a different angle here. Kick-Ass Goblin Bikers is a rank 6 Dark Fiend Xyz monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, requiring 2 or more level 6 monsters as material. You can target face-up monsters your opponent controls up to the number of goblin monsters you control, and on resolution you detach a material from a monster you control, and if you do, attach the targeted monsters to this card as material. And during your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can target cards your opponent controls up to the number of Goblin Xyz monsters you control, and on resolution you detach 3 materials from monsters you control, and if you do, send the targeted cards to the grave. Wow, so this card is kinda bonkers. Like, as a generic rank 6, this card is pretty mid. You'll only have 1 Goblin Xyz to use for both effects. But as part of the theme, there is a lot of non-destruction removal going on here, and then you can cash in those materials that you sucked up during your opponent's turn to get rid of even more cards. Poplar may have vacuumed up the Crazy Beast energy, but it's still putting in some work. But we've seen this name before in a fan translation, and we've seen how it gets in localization, so there's a lot of potential for things to have, gone wild. Alright, that's our new monsters out of the way, let's move on to the spells and traps. Like the Diabell is a quick play spell card that can be activated if a spell or trap card is sent to the grave by a card effect, letting you set a spell or trap card from your hand or grave to the field, but it can't be activated this turn. And during your main phase, you can banish 3 spell or trap cards from your graveyard, including this card, to special summon a Diabell monster from your hand or graveyard. That's right, this series of cards actually canonizes Diabell as a proper archetype, and thus every domain player trying to put both diabellstar and diabells into a single deck breathed a huge sigh of relief. The activated effect basically gives you a second shot at any of your spell and trap cards that get blasted, but I'm far more interested in the grave effect giving us access to a free Diabell. Star is probably going to be the preferred option thanks to its ability to grab any Sinful Spoil on summon, but Els forcing spell and trap setting can be pretty goofy too, effectively forcing a turn delay on quick play spells and popping cards. And we of course can't ignore the Snake Eyes diabellstar for back row shenanigans, or even reviving Queen of the White Forest Diabell for continued access to Synchro Tuner monsters. It's a pretty solid card, even if the activated effect is underwhelming. Though if I had the choice, I'd much rather be less like a Diabell and more like a dragon. Play the Diabell is a quick play spell card that can be activated when a spell or trap card is sent to the grave, but this time in response to being sent to the grave to activate a card or effect, instead of as the result of one. As for what it does, it sends an illusion or spellcaster monster from your hand, deck, or extra deck to the graveyard. During your main phase, you can banish 3 spell or trap cards from your graveyard, including this card, to special summon a Diabell monster from your hand or grave, just like the last card. So all the same stuff applies with that part, but how does a Foolish Burial line up with the theme? Well, setting up your grave with any number of monsters is pretty goofy, especially because we're checking for monster types. All the Shaddoll main deck monsters are spellcasters, as well as Winda and Apcalone, so you can trigger their effects this way. Master Tau is a revive of any illusion monster from the graveyard, and you can even send Memento Mictlan Creation King to search out that theme's field spell. It's a shame that Fiends didn't make it onto this type list, because otherwise we'd be having a field day, but with as broad a card pool as spellcasters are, there's a ton this can help to take advantage of, especially when it comes to setting up the White Forest monsters. Though if you bring this to a tournament, you better be ready to do better than play the Diabell. You'll want to play to win the Diabell. Sinful Spoils of the White Forest is a quick play spell card that you can activate if you control a Fiend, Illusion, or Spellcaster monster, and when you do so, choose one of these 2 effects. Either special summon a Fiend, Illusion, or Spellcaster monster from your hand, or fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as material. And if this card is sent to the grave to activate a monster effect, you can set this card, making it another excellent card we can send to the graveyard for our diabellstar and or White Forest monster effects. It also really helps when it comes to accessing Asomina within the White Forest engine, giving you a fusion effect to get into the fusions that require light spellcasters, while ensuring, in a way, we have the spellcaster on field necessary to activate the card in the first place. And don't be shy about what you choose to fusion summon either, because what you make is entirely restriction free. As long as you have one of the 3 listed monster types on your board, you can fusion summon for anything, and a fusion effect on a quick play spell sounds like a really good Guardian Chimera resolution to me. The other effect to summon out of the hand is a bit less splashy, but can help in a pinch if your extenders get stifled and you need some extra monsters on board. It's a welcome addition to the theme for its extra utility, but you better act on it quick. Judging from the art, this book is burning, so you better get learning. Asomina Unleashing is a normal trap card that's always treated as a White Forest card. It targets cards on the field up to the number of fusion and synchro monsters that you control or are in your graveyard, as long as they're fiend, illusion, or spellcaster type, and return those cards to the hand. And if this card is sent to the grave to activate a monster effect, you can set this card, as is the norm with White Forest spell and trap cards. This has some incredible late game payoffs, as both the Asomina and White Forest cards want to be turboing through their extra deck offerings as quickly as they can, with both themes having at least 2 lower tiered forms that are meant to upgrade into their bigger creatures. And if you want to boost their power even more, Play the Diabell can send those fusions and synchros right from the extra deck to the graveyard. And don't just look on theme for this, because once again, this is a card that checks for monster types, so any theme you splash in that fits the bill should be counted as well, with a standout being the Illusion Chimera engine. Get ready to see this being used during the mid to late game in any Sinful Spoils themed deck, lying in wait until the right time to unleash the beast, even if beast isn't one of the listed types. Sinful Spoils Awakening is a normal trap card that you can activate if you control a level 5 or higher illusion monster and your opponent controls 3 or more monsters. Target up to 3 cards they control and return them to the hand. And if you control a level 5 or higher illusion monster and this card is in your grave, you can set this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. But you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. This has a lot of similarities to Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morion, which is also able to reset itself to the field if you control a level 5 or higher illusion monster. And while the first effect has that same requirement as well, alongside your opponent needing a stocked up field, this feels like a very purposeful parallel. As for its effectiveness, I feel like it's a bit too much? In the face of 3 monsters, you need to set up a big illusion, which in our theme means summoning either Diabells with her own effect or getting out a big Asomina. And that's not terrible, but those opposing monsters may have interaction that keeps you from setting up this combo. And there's nothing worse than having a card that would totally answer the opponent if only the activation conditions were a bit less strict. To say nothing of the fact that if your opponent can put together a competent board with only 2 monsters, then you don't have any recourse no matter what. That being said, while your opponent needs to control 3 monsters to activate this card can hit any card your opponent controls, even back row, so at least you have free reign on what you get to bounce. I feel like Asomina Unleashing has the potential to be more powerful and flexible than this, so I don't know if Awakening has much of a future in competitive play, but its utility in illusion decks shouldn't be overlooked. And of course, we can't ignore Elzet's accomplishments here, having slain a witch all on her own. Don't worry, I know you have that classic post-murder trauma, but that's nothing a little brainwashing can't fix. Alright, that covers all the cards. Now it's time to talk about what they mean for the story. Our cards are split between the present and the past, and I'd like to start by covering the here and now, as the past has a lot more to dissect, and the most straightforward of our new cards is the new Goblin Biker Xyz. While it's a little tough to see with Crazy Beast taking up the foreground here, diabellstar is far in the back, riding Troika Gruyere, which has itself been hitched to the beast. They're getting the let out, and they really only have one reason to do so at this point: hunt down Diabells for some combination of revenge and wanting to get back Poplar. The effect of the card doesn't seem to have much that really informs the story outside of some general teamwork among the Goblin Bikers, and this card does have Diabellstar's battle stat line. But my favorite detail is that Clatter, one of the Goblin Bikers, seems to have salvaged some of Asomina Sol Erisichathon's helmet and halberd for new armor. Guess those little rascals really do kick ass, huh? But the subject of their pursuit is also going through some trouble. Asomina Unleashing shows diabells fully entwined in the many knurled tendrils of the Queen of the Asomina, ruler of the blighted White Forest. The evil entity is welcoming diabells back with a mockingly motherly smile, while diabells returns it with a nervous grin. We also see that the Queen has used one of the branches to destroy diabells' staff, an odd course of action if she was a loyal servant, which I feel confirms that diabells was, in fact, trying to use Poplar as a way to get close to the Queen to enact her own revenge, only to be caught at the last second, the nervous glint in diabells' eye an indicator of a plan gone wrong and a desperate attempt to save face. Not that it will amount to much. Let's take a quick look at Queen's card real quick. It does appear that this is a corrupted version of Diabell, Queen of the White Forest. Not only do they both share the Queen moniker, she also has the same double horns on one side of the head, as well as having limbs made entirely of branches. White Forest Queen has two pairs of resplendent green and purple wings, while Asomina Queen's wings are held high, but are tattered throughout, having lost their color. There is also the matching type and battle stats, with their attributes being polar opposites. And while White Forest Queen's tree branch limbs were also dark, the Asomina version has an important distinction. These ones grow the red fruits in abundance, something we never saw on White Forest Queen and were only blooming throughout the forest sparsely. Even their effects are pretty similar. Both have a way to put spell and trap cards back into your hand from the graveyard, though Asomina is focused solely on Sinful Spoils cards, which she seems to hunt with single-minded obsession. There's also a focus on revival, with White Forest Queen bringing back Synchro Tuners to the field from the grave and banishment, as well as the extra deck, while Asomina Queen summons herself from grave or banishment if sent there via an activated card effect, which is generally triggered by a fusion summon from the extra deck. I do want to point out once again just how similar that is to Dramaturge of Despia, being another big bad from another big lore story. This may just be a standard of effects we see out of big evil villains going forward, but if there's ever any talk of connecting the lores, well, you'll want to keep an eye on that. With all this information, it's clear to see that beyond a shadow of the doubt, the two queens are connected, with the White Forest matron being consumed by the evil that was unleashed with the consumption of the fruit, the original sin. But we've yet to see the full extent of their power. That honor goes to Saint Asomina, a form that presumably comes about with the presentation of Poplar, though not as they are now. Saint Asomina bucks most of the conventions of the monsters we've talked about so far. Its stat line is wholly unique, its effects don't parallel anything we've seen thus far in the story, and its fusion materials actually seem to distance it from the rest of the Asomina. Instead of looking for a particular name, type, or attribute, Saint Asomina requires a level 6 or higher fusion and a synchro monster, values that encompass any extra deck Asomina as well as any extra deck White Forest monster. So it seems that only through using the witches of the White Forest can the Asomina truly unleash their wicked power and exert full control over the power of the Sinful Spoils. In fact, its targeting protection seems tailor-made to shut down almost every Sinful Spoils card. While some still have one effect that isn't hindered by this, every Sinful Spoils card besides Sinful Spoils of the White Woods and a Deception of the Sinful Spoils involves either targeting your own cards or potentially an opponent's card, which Saint can't be affected by. This means no recycling for a draw with Wanted, no searching with original Sinful Spoils, and no flipping Saint face down with Morion. We could very well be looking at the pinnacle of the Asomina, so diabellstar has her work cut out for her when she arrives, on top of the fact that she's going to have to fight an old friend in a new, yet familiar form. Snake Eyes Damned Dragon is without a doubt a fusion of the original Sinful Spoil and the original Sin Keeper, and considering its fusion material is an Asomina in all but name. Its new scales are a match for Diabell's coat, with her nail talons extruding from the peak of its wings. It even has Diabell's left purple eye. This is sadly on brand for the Asomina, as just about all of the Queen's servants are fusions themselves, so now Diabell's has been officially inducted into the fold. Or should I say, inducted once again. However, because the act of its creation isn't shown, we have to speculate under which circumstances it happened. This loosely looks like a corrupted version of Diabell's, but because it doesn't look solely like a corrupted form of Diabell's, having mixed in the Flamberge model, it doesn't seem like she's been turned into an Asomina puppet like her mentors were. having her soul extracted and turned into a Sinful Spoil itself. The other implication is that Poplar absorbed diabells, a technique we've seen from the little creature already. This would explain why we have so many of the diabells' features here, much like how it had many of Crazy Beast's features after its power was absorbed, but it didn't have any similarity to Flamber's dragon at that time. Here, it's almost more like a palette swap of the original. So for clarity, we'll have to turn to the Sinful Spoils lore segment that we got in the valuable book EX4. Flamber's dragon was once a guardian deity of the land it served, but was twisted by the Snake Eyes Sinful Spoil, the one whose power is subversion. So while Poplar is able to absorb the powers and forms of what it consumes, this dragon is likely an entity completely separate from Poplar itself, having been so strong that, even though it was absorbed by Poplar, took it over in its new form. And the connection between the Snake Eye and the Asomina goes even deeper than that. Let's begin to turn our gaze towards the cards that highlight the history of our lore, beginning with Sinful Spoils of the White Forest. In this art, we can see the White Forest Queen sheltering the two students, Elzette and Esteller, surrounded by 7 snake eye sigils, forming a halo around her head as a large claw comes to snatch her away. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen this imagery. The 7 snake eyes also appear in the card Scourge of the White Forest, where the queen takes a bite from the forbidden fruit and begins her transformation, her body breaking apart and crumbling at the edges, waiting to be reformed. And I think the tragedy is that Scourge comes before Sinful Spoils of the White Forest. Look at the apprentices here. They lay slumped at the base of the queen, even though they should be running or fighting for their lives. In fact, if my timeline is correct, we've just seen them reaching out, trying to stop Diabell from consuming the fruit. But now, it's like they're lifeless. If nothing else, a part of them seems to be missing. Their shadow puppets only half of what they once were. But while it may seem like they're disintegrating, I think it makes more sense that they're being rebuilt, especially since they are colored green and purple. Weeping after witnessing the destruction her corruption has caused, in a moment of lucid thought, Diabell cries and cries, and her energy slowly seeps from her and into the apprentices, giving them new life. This is how they inherited the title of Diabell, as they both carry a part of the queen within them, in the hopes that she could atone for what she had done, before the corruption took over completely. And while it seems that the newly christened diabellstar was able to leave the forest, Diabell's was not. Her body was wrapped in thorns, her purple eye replaced by one of the red fruits, and was given command of a giant skeletal dragon, one that seemed possessed of flame itself, with a number of passengers rooted to its spine whose heads were replaced by towering infernos. While the structure of the skeleton doesn't quite line up, this could very well be a primary form of Flamber's dragon. Upon being enthralled, Elzette was sent out on a mission. Hunt down more Sinful Spoils and find the original, so that the Asomina may regain its true power. This puts our little witch into the battle we see in play the Diabell, fighting against another witch which we can surmise is Morion. She has the same clawed nails and affinity for birds as older Diabells will have once she obtains Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morion. We also know that she will someday become Asomina Moa Regina, based on her headwear and jacket. But the part I find most fascinating is the broom that she's riding on, which billows the same kind of golden wisps that we'd see Diabells using. The combined mind of the skeletal dragon and the corrupted Elzette is too much for Morion, and ends up being skewered by a number of large thorns, that same golden energy streaming out of her body as her life force fades. But as the battle draws to a close, a miracle occurs. The chains and thorns that had enveloped Diabell's were fading away. The fruits that had pockmarked her body withered and crumbled to dust, but she was forced to confront the fact that she had killed someone, even if it was under the control of the Asomina. But what had saved her in the first place? Well, as I'm wont to do, I have a theory. The card's name is Sinful Spoils Awakening, and we know that Morion is destined to become one. Since the witch was defeated by someone possessed by the Asomina, and as someone who will become an Asomina puppet themselves, it stands to reason that a Sinful Spoil was created, the soul of the witch being removed during the battle, and becomes that Sinful Spoil, taking root in Elzette herself, giving her a resistance to the Asomina curse. In fact, it's this act that brings clarity to why she was abandoned to the Asomina, while Esteller was free to go. See, the apprentices had two mentors, and while both had turned to Sinful Spoils, neither of them went to Elzet's aid. Both found refuge with Esteller, and with their power to resist the Asomina, she was able to escape the brambles of the corrupted forest. And indeed, that was the case. Like the Diabellstar shows us a number of scenes in Diabellstar's life leading up to the present. At the top, we can see a fledgling mage finding shelter, while two bottles full of burning fire sit on a desk, one being Silva's orange, the other Ursiella's blue. Another shows her with a bindle of supplies as two ruffians run off in an opposite direction, perhaps showing her deviousness in stealing goods to make ends meet during tough times. The bottom panel shows her facing off against a pack of monstrous wolves, perhaps an attempt to tame them as her mentor once had. And front and center we can see Diabellstar, a broken monocle trapping her messy hair, a dagger in one hand that would one day become a mighty sword, while the other hand secured a satchel of reagents. One bottle seems to have what appears to be wolf fur, the other a bat's wing, and in her hand, an artifact we've never seen before, a green, glassy heart. A fragment of Diabell, perhaps? The Queen's power may not have fully taken hold quite yet, but the green can still be seen creeping in from her hair. This revelation is a deeper wound than any of the Asomina's thorns to Elzet. Abandoned by her mentors, left to rot in the clutches of an ancient evil, even if it did require both to stave off the direct control of the entity, why pick her? Why Esteller over Elzet? Why make her an instrument of murder? Why make her bear such grief? The only thing she could do was laugh it off. Anything to ignore the pain. And so, her plan was clear. With Morion and her exceptional Sinful Spoils at her disposal, she would bide her time. If two Sinful Spoils are what's needed to oppose the corrupted queen, she would wait until another had surfaced. Then she would snatch it up and get her revenge. And if Diabellstar did all the work for her, well, good. She was the one who managed to get away. She was the one who didn't get turned into a puppet by an ancient evil demon. Taking a little treasure from the treasure hunter would just be settling the score. But as we can see, this plan, if that even was Diabell's intent, did not end the way she wanted. And so, Diabellstar rushes to intercept, and will hopefully stop the corrupted queen's reign before her newfound power of the Snake Eye runs rampant and covers the whole world in thorns. Next time, when the core set Alliance Insight releases, the last release of the second year of Series 12, the final battle for control of one's destiny begins, and to the winner goes the Sinful Spoils. But before we wrap things up, I wanted to cover something that's been nagging at me for a while now. Whenever we see the Snake Eye symbol associated with Asomina, there's always 7 of them, a very auspicious number. The lore makes it seem like any number of Sinful Spoils can exist, and yet there may be exactly 7 that we can account for. 4 of them have been named and added to the game already. The Sinful Spoils of Subversion, Betrayal, Doom, and A Slumber all have cards, and each one is associated with a character. Snake Eye, Silvera, Ursiella, and Morion. And from the lore, we know that it was Crazy Beast that absorbed the Sinful Spoil of Aethon, whose body would become Asomina's Sol Erisichathon. But that's just 5. What about the other 2? Well, would you believe me if I said that those 2 would be the souls of Elzet and Esteller? Remember, if I'm correct about the order of events, those 2 would have been killed at the hands of the corrupted queen, making her an Asomina. So if it holds true that this process separates the soul from the body, this would make a Sinful Spoil for each of them. In fact, Asomina Elzet, despite not being a fusion, is an Asomina puppet until she receives a Sinful Spoil, lending credence to that theory. But what about the queen herself? If she's been possessed by the Asomina, wouldn't her soul be pushed out of her body as well? And I believe that's the case. Her heart was broken over the loss of her 2 charges, and her soul escapes in 2 fragments, each half going to the soulless body of her apprentices. I do feel like, despite having Diabell's soul, the 2 apprentices still act of their own accord. In fact, it's kind of in their name. Each one has Diabell, with the other half being part of their old name, the soul of the queen, but the heart of the apprentice, working in tandem. But it was the Sinful Spoils of the mentors that ultimately gave Esteller the chance to escape, while Elzet was not so lucky. So while it may sound like an outlandish theory, mark my words, we're due for a Sinful Spoils Aethon, Elzet, and Esteller before this story wraps up below. Now, we normally try to section off the different support into their own categories to keep things sorted out, but because we've reached peak levels of brandedization, where the different themes have meshed and combined together, we'll just be covering them all in my usual order altogether. So keep an eye out for all the different interactions that these cards have, because these are some doozies. Diabellstar, the Sin Adjudicator, is a level 8 Dark Fiend monster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense that is always treated as a Sinful Spoils card. You can banish one spell card and one trap card from your hand and or grave to special summon this card from your hand or grave. And as a quick effect, you can pay half your life points, then target a card your opponent controls and destroy it. Then, if another Diabell monster card is on the field, you can special summon an illusion or spellcaster tuner synchro monster from your extra deck, giving you some overlap with White Forest. But there is a bit of a conflict here. Most of the White Forest spell and trap cards have ways to reset themselves from the graveyard when sent there, and they're gonna have a tough time doing that if you banish them. But with all the great non-engine cards in the game, you should be able to find some good fodder to help this hit the field. And because it can be summoned from the hand or graveyard, this is almost always going to be a threat. Its removal effect is pretty risky, having to give up half your life points to do it, but sometimes the right pop at the right time can change the tide of battle. And you might even get a free monster out of it. Who could pass up that? Currently, we only have 5 targets for this effect, but the only ones that are really worthwhile are the White Forest ones. Summon Silvera to hit your opponent with a board-wide Book of Moon, or grab Ursiella to grab any White Forest or light spellcaster that you like. There won't be any synchro summoning happening afterwards, since 8 plus 6 is a level beyond our reckoning, but that just means they're going to work well with other non-tuners that we field. This card is chock full of value, and all you had to do to get it was perform some Spirit Digivolution with her Sinful Spoils. Honestly, wish we'd done that sooner. That would have solved a lot of problems. Diabell's the White Witch is a level 8 light illusion monster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense that is always treated as a White Forest card. Monsters you control can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects while you control 2 or more Diabell monsters, and you can send a spell or trap card from your hand or field to the grave to special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can send a Sinful Spoils or Diabell card from your deck to the grave. And by doing that, you can send Sin Adjudicator to the grave to set up its summon. If you have another spell or trap card in the graveyard to complement the one that you pitched to summon Diabell's, you can bring Adjudicator out, which will then turn Diabell's effect destruction protection online. And Adjudicator's pop now has that bonus summon. And if you want to get really cheeky, you've got everything you need for a rank 8 summon. Alternatively, if the card you pitched was one of those White Forest ones we mentioned earlier, you can set it back to your field, giving you a big body for free. Now, don't get me wrong, Diabell's was already pretty strong while harnessing the power of Toxic Yuri, but now that we've embraced the light of Wholesome Yuri, nothing will stand in their way. Just to ignore the fact that Wholesome Yuri involves Diabell shoving Diabellstar into the grave so she can claw herself out again. That's normal. Women be putting each other in the grave, I don't know what to tell you. That's basically how all the Mayakashi stuff happens. Asomina is a level 12 light illusion fusion monster with 4000 attack and defense, requiring Queen Asomina and a fusion or synchro monster as material. And it must first be either fusion summoned or special summoned from the extra deck by tributing a copy of Saint Asomina that you control and a face-up monster your opponent controls. It can't be destroyed by card effects, and each time your opponent activates a card or effect, all monsters your opponent currently controls lose 500 attack immediately after it resolves. Also, your opponent can't activate the effects of monsters with 0 attack. Wow, are they just incapable of printing a bad Asomina card? This fusion is going ballistic! For those of you who didn't catch the Supreme Darkness lore update video, first off, go watch that! Your local lore junkie has to eat. And second, Saint Asomina is a fusion introduced in that set that, when summoned, got you another free Asomina from your deck or extra deck so long as it was level 9 or below. And this extends past that, trading out Saint's strange targeting disabling and battle damage reflection for effect destruction protection, an actual attack stat, stacking an attack debuff that eventually shuts off effects, oh, and kaijuing your opponent. Yeah, Tributing an opponent's face-up monster for this is one of the most comprehensive ways to answer a threat, and unlike playing an actual kaiju, you aren't giving your opponent anything for the privilege. You're not even playing a main deck brick for it. And that's only one way you can bring this out. With a named material and a pretty broad category of material as the fusion recipe, this is another nasty super polymerization outlet, using either the actual Queen Asomina or a fusion substitute, since the effect doesn't say it has to be made with Queen Asomina. And as an Asomina monster, you can just summon this from your extra deck by feeding 3 Sinful Spoils cards to one of your Asomina summoning effects. Though, at that point, you might as well just spend 2 to get Saint Asomina and then tribute up. This is going to be an annoying boss monster for some time to come, and is going to be added to the big pile of things with horns that have big lore implications. It may be made of entirely different material, it may not look entirely the same, and it's certainly not a star god monster, but you better believe that none of that is getting in the way of me side-eyeing it like the next coming of Sophia. Everything is dual terminal, you hear me? Mystic Mystery of the White Forest is a level 4 light illusion synchro tuner monster with 700 attack and 2000 defense, requiring generic material. If this card is special summoned, you can target 2 White Forest monsters in your grave and place them face up in their owner spell and trap zones as continuous spells. And during your opponent's main phase, you can, as a quick effect, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon using this card that you control. Poplar's final form has been unveiled, and it's a pretty tricky one. This makes for the 3rd valid summon off of Sin Adjudicator's effect, filling up your back row with White Forest monsters while giving you access to level 12 synchros, one of which is going to be very relevant in just a second. The White Forests themselves don't thrive so much being in the back row, that's more of a Snake Eye thing, but we do have a few effects we could use to help pop them out of the back row from across the entire span of the lore that we've seen so far. Heck, at the very least, putting 2 monsters in your back row gives you all the material you need to, and I can't believe this is a sentence I get to say, contact fuse using your continuous spell monsters for Snake Eye's Doomed Dragon. And as is typical for synchro tuner monsters, it has a quick sync effect, which means this also just combos with most on-summon effects of synchro monsters, even our own White Forest synchros. I mean, we've already talked about how busted Silvera can be when you hit your opponent with it at your leisure. This is another fairly useful tool that goes into your toolbox that can accomplish some zany things as you build up your board without the card itself being too wild. Though I wonder how Poplar feels about having its Snake Eye citizenship revoked and replaced with another eye-coded aesthetic. Kind of feels like we're just passing this little guy around for the fun of it. Better than whatever's going on with loot over in Magic the Gathering though, sheesh. Outlaws of Thunder Junction isn't even a year old and they're already plastering loot all over everything like it's their next Pikachu, good grief. Snake Eye's Execute Dragon is a level 12 Fire Dragon Synchro monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring generic material. During the main phase, as a quick effect, you can target a face-up monster on the field or in either grave and place it face up in its owner's spell and trap zone as a continuous spell card. Also, this card can't use this effect next turn, giving it a conspicuously Mirror Jade-esque feeling. Also, during the battle phase, as a quick effect, you can target 2 cards on the field, a monster and a continuous spell card, and destroy them. Now, the way this is formatted, you might think you have to destroy a card on both sides of the field, but Scrap Dragon, this is not. If your opponent has both a continuous spell and a monster, you can take out both, and Execute Dragon comes with the tools to burden your opponent with the spell part. Don't worry, you can generally count on your opponent to provide the rest, and because of this, combined with its generic material requirements, this can see play in basically anything that has the level 12 synchro access. True, this does some good work in Snake Eye, populating the back row with on-theme monsters like Flamberge so we can pop them and convert it into even more material, but what deck doesn't like the idea of non-destruction removal combined with more removal that just so happens to involve destruction? It truly is a force to be reckoned with and is ready to help execute your opponent. In the game. If I'm using this card to execute things outside the game, trust me, the targets are going to be way more political. I would say this card is kind of like the guillotine of monsters, wouldn't you agree? Filius Diabell is a normal spell card that adds a level 8 or higher Diabell monster from your deck to your hand, or if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon it instead. If this card is banished, you can make all Diabell monsters you control gain 500 attack. So, because it only hunts down level 8 or higher monsters, the old diabellstar and diabells are off limits. And while this is a blow to all fans of the unhinged Claw Gal, diabellstar still has Seeker of the Sinful Spoils, so options still overfloweth. But we don't just have to settle for putting it into our hand. This is an absolute bop going second to getting us a free White Witch Diabells to set up any number of Sinful Spoils plays. Not to mention, this makes for the perfect card to banish for summoning Sin Adjudicator, since this will actually land you a benefit when it's being banished. 2500 is pretty nice for some free bodies, but turning them into 3Ks? Nah, that's putting in some damage. And those aren't the only targets, as this can also tutor or summon Snake Eyes Diabellstar, which has its own host of nonsense it can pull off in Snake Eyes lists. Shame we had to eat the Goblin Biker's Crazy Beast for that though. Guess they didn't go bonkers enough. Oh, that's why they didn't get any new support this set. They're dead! Maybe. Witches of the White Forest is a field spell card that, when activated, lets you add a White Forest monster from your deck to your hand, and if you do, you can't special summon dark monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. The first time each White Forest monster you control would be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not, and you can target a White Forest monster you control, and it's treated as a tuner this turn. Well, it showed up a tad late to the party, but here it is, a field spell we can use to search any member of our theme. From combo starters to extenders, this field spell has you covered, and even helps you out in a lot of corner cases. The lower stats of our monsters make them susceptible to battle destruction, so having a way to keep them safe for a bit is a welcome addition. And while the lines of play just about always include the right mix of tuner and non-tuner to get your game plan off the ground, being able to make a card into a tuner at the drop of a hat really slaps. In fact, this works best in combination not with White Forest, but with Asomina, or should I say, both White Forest and Asomina. The Corrupted LZ makes for a great addition to both themes, as well as a bridge between them, but if we aren't leaning as much on the White Forest half, you're gonna have a hard time getting their effects that trigger when being used as synchro material. But the field spell makes up for that, even though it does actually kind of block you out of summoning Asominas from the extra deck that you use the search effect, so I mean it does have some speed bumps, but it was already going to be tricky getting the two themes to play nice with each other anyway. They're basically sworn enemies. Honestly, I think we're lucky we were even able to get them onto a single card once. Curse of Diabell is a normal trap card that you can activate if you control 2 or more Diabell monsters. Send a monster you control to the grave to destroy all face-up cards your opponent controls. And if this card is sent to the graveyard or banished from the hand or deck, you can add a Diabell spell or trap card from your deck to your hand except a copy of this card. Hell yeah! Add this to the pile of things you get to do once you get the 2 Diabells together. Now, we can kind of board wipe our opponent. It's also another kind of fantastic option to spend on the summon of Sin Adjudicator, because by banishing Curse, you essentially gain access to every other Diabell spell or trap card. However, you'll have to banish it from your hand to do it, because it does not trigger if it's banished from the grave. Now, admittedly, that's a pretty shallow pool to search through, but assuming we've already used Phileas Diabell, like the Diabell and play the Diabell are still some fantastic options if you're continuing to extend your plays. Heck, you don't even have to banish it. All you have to do is send it from the hand or deck by a card effect, and thankfully we have a lot of tools for that. Foolish Burial Goods just does it directly, but you can also pitch it with either diabellstar the Black Witch or Diabells the White Witch. It's such a useful mechanic that honestly, the board wipe is the most blasé thing about it. And given the card art, I think Asomina feels the same way. Like, if you're disintegrating in a pillar of pink flames, you should probably be freaking out a lot more. Sinless Sinful Spoils is a continuous trap card that allows you to activate one of the following effects once per turn. You can either target a Diabell monster in your grave or banishment and discard a card, and if you do, special summon that monster, or target a face-up monster card in your spell and trap card zone and special summon it. Both of these effects are pretty solid. The Diabell targets are universally good, with the most prevalent being the Black Witch, so you get that free Sinful Spoils card. And with Mystic Mystery, even White Forest can benefit from the Snake Eyes treatment since it doesn't care what card you pick to summon from the back row. This means you can technically splash it into any theme that puts monsters in the back row like Centurion and Crystal Beasts, but those themes kind of already have ways to operate under those conditions, so if the themes you splash it with don't have any other forms of synergy, you might want to avoid muddying the waters. Overall, very happy to see this, but boy do I hope the localization does some tweaking here. Like, I know what it was going for, but like, we can't be calling it sinless Sinful Spoils, then all you've got left is spoils. And if there's anything the nerdy internet zeitgeist hates, it's spoilers. Alright, with all the cards out of the way, it's time to talk about the story. And the best thing we can do is recap where we left things off last time. Much of what we saw concerned how all of this began, with the evil of the forest running rampant after a bite was taken from the forbidden fruit. Both the teachers and the matron of the woods were consumed by its corrupting influence, but not before imparting certain gifts to the two disciples. Stellar and Elzet both inherited part of the power of Diabell, and the mentors were even able to send their souls in the form of Sinful Spoils along with Stellar, who would take the name diabellstar, wandering the world and gaining strength by seeking sinful spoils. Elzet, however, was not so lucky. Without the protection of the Sinful Spoils, she was turned into a puppet of the Asomina, who was made to hurt other witches to add to the forest's growing power. With the assistance of a skeletal dragon, Elzet fought against a practitioner of the magical arts and slew her, but not before this mysterious witch could perform one final act. As she was defeated by a scion of the Asomina, the witch's soul was turned into a sinful spoil, which freed Elzet from the clutches of the forest's darkness. Armed with new power and taking on the name Diabells, the original Sin Keeper made it her mission to track down the means by which the Asomina could be eradicated, no matter what course of action it would take. But this would bode poorly for both disciples. Diabells absconded with Poplar while leaving diabellstar languishing in a prison complex, forced to fight off against the Asomina puppets of her past. Not only was the witch that fought Elzet among their ranks, as well as a knightly Asomina tied to the Goblin Biker's crazy beast, the shells of both Sylvie and Rusia hunted her down. It was a grueling battle, but one that diabellstar emerged from victorious. Diabell's plan sadly did not go as well. Taking Poplar into the heart of the forest, the original Sin Keeper was overpowered and met with a terrible fate, transforming into a warped combination of an Asomina puppet and feral Poplar dragon. Once again, Elzet had returned to the service of the Queen, but this time, diabellstar would not leave her fellow student behind. Not again. Approaching at full speed, pulled by the mighty crazy beast itself, having gone from wild to completely bonkers, diabellstar arrived with a flash of steel, severing one of Saint Asomina's vines, as seen in Filius Diabell. Greek is a language that's cropped up over the past few sets, so it makes sense it would resurface again here. And what is Filius? Friendship, affection, love. Despite their differences, despite their clash, despite the simmering resentment and everything that's come between them over these long, grueling years, they still care for each other. At least enough to wade headfirst into a forest of gnarled vines controlled by an ancient evil. The attack, however, was not without its casualties. Crazy Beast lies defeated, and the rest of the Goblin Bikers are nowhere to be seen. Hopefully we'll get some kind of epilogue that shows what happened to him. I'd hate for them to exit the story so abruptly. There's also one more interesting detail. The paws of Sinful Spoils Silvera are now draped around Diabell's, an act that has presumably saved her from her fate as Snake Eye's doomed dragon when combined with the powers of Morion. Unfortunately, this leaves diabellstar with only Ursiella, one single Sinful Spoil. Saint Asomina takes no time converting the new, defenseless diabellstar into her new pawn. If Doomed Dragon would not serve her, there would be another more fitting to execute her final plan. Diabellstar was absorbed with Ursiella into the feral Poplar Dragon, creating a green, black, and red monstrosity of unimaginable might. And to make matters worse, the arrival of even more Sinful Spoils meant the power at Saint Asomina's fingertips grew even further, ascending beyond sainthood and encroaching upon the realm of the gods themselves. Asomina, seated atop an auspicious floating throne, her wooden vines transformed into golden ones, still brimming with thorns, a punishment for those who would encroach upon the first sin. And behind her hung the Eye, the eternal Eye that watches over all things. It was on the fruit of the forest. It was the shape of the hallowed Asomina. It was at the core of Diabell's power, and of course, the one that has been with us since the very beginning, the Snake Eye of the original sin. An eye that is always watching, always judging. Upon this golden throne, with eternal eye unfurled, she grasps the fruit of the forest, perhaps in preparation to start this tragic story anew. The fruit would birth a new forest, and new magical practitioners would be lured inside, looking for a safe place to live and hone their craft, only to find that they had already been living within the trap this entire time. And while it may seem far-fetched that this is the beginning of a new cycle, remember that Yu-Gi-Oh's stories thrive on the idea of cyclical trauma. What happened once shall happen again, a process that we have seen in Dual Terminal, in Draco Slayer, and even Visas. But there is evidence for this even within our own story. Cast your mind back to the original Snake Eyes monsters. Ash, Birch, Oak, Poplar. It seems strange that the names of trees were associated with a fire pyro archetype. But if one considers that this used to be another coven of magical practitioners, whose forest may have been burned down either by a populace that was wary of their existence, or as an attempt to stop another Asomina uprising before it could begin, it makes a lot more sense. In fact, as Snake Eye is the original Sinful Spoil, a creature that spurred Asomina into her future evolutions, I think I'm on the right track here. But within the sight of this eternal, oppressive observation lies the key to breaking such a cycle. The agents of the Asomina have created the Sinful Spoils. To them, sin was theirs to identify, and in doing so, this gave them power over it. But of what sins are these people guilty of? Compassion? Determination? Sacrifice? Love? The Asomina have decided the nature of these people's souls all this time, but for no longer. It is these people who have clawed their way through hardship and woe to determine the value of their own spirits, and to deny the Asomina their judgment is to deny them everything. Deep within the recesses of Snake Eye's Execute Dragon, Diabellstar comes face to face with a familiar companion, Poplar, wrapped in the dark vines of the Asomina, but not as she once knew him. Having absorbed the powers of both Diabellstar and Diabells, Poplar's Snake Eye sigil was now possessed of the combined might of the old mistress of the White Forest, shining both green and purple, both black and white. And it is with that power, passed on by an old master and given new life with the bonds of friends and lovers, Diabellstar would no longer let Asomina hold sway over what was and was not sin. This was something she would adjudicate herself. After all, Poplar was the sinful spoil of subversion. What better way to turn this power dynamic on its head? Emerging triumphantly from Execute Dragon and under Poplar's protection, Diabellstar the Sin Adjudicator combined their power with Diabells the White Witch, having fully embraced her powers once again as a disciple of the White Forest, and with their might, with the will to overturn a creature of ancient, deep-seated loathing and darkness, caused the deified Asomina at the cusp of their ultimate power to crumble and evaporate, consumed in light. Diabell had, in a way, cursed her disciples to live in a world of sadness and fear. Now, that same fate was imposed on Asomina, and in the face of the trials that Esteller and Elzet was forced to shoulder, the elusive god faltered. In the aftermath, the two witches say goodbye to the ghosts of their family. Even in the face of victory, the dead could not be returned. But one last miracle still avails them. One last chance for the mentors to share how proud they are. One last moment for the queen of the forest to cradle her disciples. One last, fleeting, ephemeral instant where reconciliation can be found. And then, silence. And this is where the story ends, at least for now. The White Forest has returned to how it once was, without a single red fruit to be seen. There are those who say that two witches who look after the trees and the wildlife live among them, and while the trees grow tall and the shade is plentiful, it is a land where darkness holds no sway. Should you find these witches as you travel through the lands, pay your respects and show kindness, and you shall be treated as such in turn. And if you're lucky, and you keep a very good eye out, then hidden among the alabaster branches, a small, crimson creature may catch your eye. Is it a scion of the red fruit, or a mischievous familiar? Not even this storyteller knows. But perhaps that is for the best. One last mystic mystery for the White Forest. Today's episode is brought to you by Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout while helping out the channel. It was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander, Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, 50 Gigabytes, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Ancient Wizard, Andrew Newman, Battle Axe, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Eric, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Great Big Pillock, Roog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Marion James E. Bacata, Meme King, Millennia Asta, Muse Clark, Neon Yaminair, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Pat Boos, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sonic 21 Blast, The Critic of Innocence, Thievery Coast and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Ally Vatnia, Animasta, Anthrak, A Random Pup, Blitzwolf, Chaz Ghost, Christopher Fuss, again, Chris B, Cool Trainer Dark, Dr. Entity RIP, EB Channel, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Herbal D, Inblink, Julian Marquez, Kale the Dragon, Lobomaru02, Manga Pages, Natiel Lee Alexander, Nitromo, Not Al Gore, Obsidian, Pombo, Rhyme Kairos, Shizuka Nishimura, Simic Toadstool, Sir Knight JCB, Svilia, Stephen Huntsman, Stephen Williamson, The Legendary Raven, The Phantom Knights of Shitted Pants, The Queen of Time, The Gene, Tiger X2476, Tristan O'Meara and Zaldrucka, as well as all the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member.